Looking at Michael over there.
South Bend, but we don't have any room,
I don't know. I don't know.
because we don't have any big hotels.
Either at shrinking or it's gonna be getting taller.
They're getting taller. Yeah,
I'm close enough to the ground already.
right. Look at these pencil drawer, little thing for your paper cash. Cash register. Uh-oh.
Up here.
Hickson Boss Junior.
Oh, yeah. It's a big win. Sold out there.
Hey, Greg. I didn't want to bring it up this minute, but I've got a great concern with the code.
Don't start that.
We have to,
Don't start that.
Lincoln went to demolish. Just in case. And it's still not maintained.
I said I'm either
Yeah, he says
shrinking
it's too
or,
expensive.
Are ya?
I know I'm low to the ground to start.
Oh, excellent. We're going to, when we get to that point of the agenda, I'll ask the clerk to read the resolution. Then I'll ask anybody who wants to speak in favor to come forward. So you're welcome to come to the podium and introduce your friends and give a little background and talk.
They know better.
It was showing on my phone.
Excellent. Yep,
But it
you're
was
welcome to do that. So, and actually, when we get, we don't have a really lengthy agenda, and when we get to the resolutions pretty quick in the meeting, and you're the first one out of the chute, so.
Your limit is 30 minutes.
And because we're so accommodating, you don't even have to stick around after your portion's done if you want to head for the hills. We won't, the one reason you might want to stick around is that everybody's going to sign the resolution, but she may have to make some copies anyway. So if you go by the clerk's office tomorrow or call over there, they'll have some copies if you want.
Picture. Okay.
She can make some copies for you so that if you want to, whatever you want to do with them, you'll have them for your purposes.
So if I stick around, I get the resolution?
Probably not, because we've got to run down the signatures. A lot of times, we're like cats, we scatter, and then she's got to track us down to get signatures, and, but, you know, after the meeting, if you want to talk to Debbie, if she can make it happen, that's fine with me. My guess would be you'll be coming by tomorrow.
Picture is hitting part of the.
It's so weird.
If I were you, that's what I'd do.
The hell.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
My question
it's been 6 months.
That's weird.
That is.
Might try to just start with
And we talked about that in the budget meetings, did we not?
Well,
And
Didn't even know they had dual
candidates.
Oh, you know what? It's
Maybe
front
he
and
got
back.
bid, but
And then
It's not
one
being moved.
facing you, one facing there. That's what you were looking at. Now it's.
And there's a new home being built right across the street. They're concerned about that.
The regular meeting of the Mishawaka Common Council for Monday, November 7th, 2022 will please come to order. Good evening. Those of you who are here with us live and in person this evening, we're happy to see you. If you would, please take a moment and check your cell phone to make sure that you have placed it on vibrate or silent. And for those of you who are participating remotely, good evening to you as well. We appreciate your participation, and to facilitate an orderly meeting, members of the public are asked to place their microphone on mute during the meeting with the exception of any public hearing. At the appropriate point in the public hearing, I will invite the public to unmute their microphone for purposes of submitting such comments as they may wish to make, one person at a time. All persons wishing to make public comments will be asked to first state their name and address for the record. After completing the comment, members of the public will once again be asked to place their microphone on mute, and we thank you all for your cooperation. With that, please join us in rising for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. DeMade?
Here.
Mr. Hazen?
Here.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Here.
Mr. Benicki?
Here.
Mr. Emmons?
Here.
Mr. Belovich?
Here.
Mr. Compton?
Here.
Mrs. Volker?
Here.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh?
Here. Approval of the minutes of our regular meeting of October 17th, 2022. Are there any additions or corrections? Then hearing none, the minutes stand approved as received from the clerk's office. Petitions, communications, remonstrance, and memorial.
Yes, Mr. President, we have an appeal number 2022-44 to the Board of Zoning Appeals and to the Common Council. This is a use variance for outpatient counseling and services at 1328 West Dragoon Trail, Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend. Catholic Charities is the tenant. This is signed by Daniel Florian.
Thank you. This evening, we have no report of any special committee, so we'll move into ordinances on first reading.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-39, an ordinance of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, authorizing the City of Mishawaka, Indiana to issue one or more series of its taxable economic development lease rental revenue bonds, and approving and authorizing other actions in respect thereto.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-39 will be assigned to the Budget and Finance Committee. Resolutions.
Resolution R 2022-32, a resolution of the Common Council, City Clerk, and Mayor of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, commemorating Women's Entrepreneurship Day, November 19th, 2022.
We'll now move into the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-32. And before I invite any speakers to the podium, Madam Clerk, would you please read the resolution?
Yes, sir. Whereas women contribute to the diversity and inclusiveness of business nationwide and are vital of the growth of the economy, and whereas according to the 2017 study conducted by the National Association of Women Business Owners, more than 11.6 million firms were owned by women, employing nearly 9 million people and generating $1.7 trillion in sales. And according to that same 2017 study, women-owned businesses comprised 39% of all private firms, contributing an estimated 8% of employment across the United States and 4.2% of revenue. Whereas in Indiana, according to the U.S. Small Business Administrative 2021 report, women made up 47.3% of the workers and owned 42.4% of businesses across our state. Whereas the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's latest survey indicated women-owned small businesses were the hardest hit and are less likely to experience future success as a result of the pandemic. Since the onset of COVID-19, many women-owned businesses have closed, and Mishawaka is no exception. Whereas according to the most recent United States Census, 11.8% of the businesses in St. Joseph County, 690 total, and 15% of the businesses in Mishawaka, 192 total, were women-owned. Whereas since the onset of COVID-19, the wage gap continues to widen across Indiana, with women in Indiana earning a median income of $53,314, which on average is $27,907 less than their male counterparts. Whereas eradicating extreme poverty across our state and nation depends on the ensuring inclusive economic growth that reaches excluded populations like women and communities of color. Whereas Women Entrepreneurship Day is a movement to support women in business by encouraging women leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs to initiate startups, drive economic expansion, and advance communities worldwide. Whereas the City of Mishawaka recognizes and promotes the advancement of women's entrepreneurship throughout our community and statewide. Now therefore be it resolved by the Common Council, the City Clerk, and the Mayor of the City of Mishawaka that November 19th, 2022 is hereby proclaimed to be Women's Entrepreneurship Day in the City of Mishawaka, and we commend its observance to all residents.
Thank you. With that, if there is anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution, if you would please come forward to the podium and begin by stating your name and address for the record.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Cindy Cohen. My address is 19009 Layden Street, South Bend, Indiana. I have some ladies with me here tonight. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. I'm like so excited. It's hard for me to even talk, so I'm going to get it out though. So Women's Entrepreneurship Day is the opportunity to recognize and honor the critical role women-owned businesses play in strengthening our local economy. Did you know women-owned businesses in Indiana consist of 37% of all businesses, and St. Joe County 12%, and Mishawaka 15%? I like to point out there's a big difference between 37% and 15% in Mishawaka, which, by the way, only consists of 192 women-owned businesses in our city. Women entrepreneurship is not just nice, it's not cute, it's important. You may not know this, but 50% of the women who seek entrepreneurship do so because of financial emergency, like they need to pay for shelter or food for that day, or maybe an urgent reason, like they lost the income from a death, disability, or absence of a spouse. From launching dream businesses to creating communities and finding new ways to do business, women entrepreneurs have so much to be proud of, and we want them to know that we're all proud of them too. Today and every day is a day to celebrate the power and potential of women entrepreneurs, while recognizing the barriers they've overcome and the trials they've endured trying to build a thriving business. I am proud to support the City of Mishawaka, who stands alongside 120 countries worldwide and bringing awareness of the significance of economic impact and social events of women-owned businesses in their community. Now more than ever, women entrepreneurs are playing a role in the ongoing economic recovery by creating new business startups, pivoting the businesses that they have, and in some cases completely reinventing the business that they had to meet the needs of their neighbors. See to Your Health Women's Initiative is a nonprofit organization founded 5 years ago. Our goal was, and still is, to support women from low-income neighborhoods and domestic violence seeking entrepreneurship by providing connections to role models, mentoring, resources, and inspiration. In the beginning, we were looking to start a grassroots movement for women in our community to come together to support each other and those who are seeking entrepreneurship as a means of economic security, no matter what their ethnic background was or is, the financial means that they found themselves in. We are about bringing women together to eradicate extreme poverty across our city by ensuring inclusive economic growth to women of color who are typically excluded. We're about encouraging women leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs to initiate startup businesses, drive economic expansion, and advance the place that we call home. Alongside the women in our community, we stand for the future of women entrepreneurship, inclusiveness, and advancement. Together, we are all stronger. I encourage everyone to show your appreciation today and every day by supporting local women entrepreneurs, women-owned businesses, enterprises, and charities that support women in our community. On behalf of the women entrepreneurs in our community, thank you to Mayor Dave Wood, the Mishawaka Common Council, and the citizens of this beautiful Mishawaka city for setting aside a time to support Women's Entrepreneurship Day on November 19th. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Cohen? Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you so much.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor? Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Vita Harley. My organization is Women Entrepreneurs Matter, Inc. We matter because we make it happen every single day. I am ready. We are ready. In 2018, I had met Cindy, and the federal government had came to Mishawaka at the 101 Center, and they talked about women entrepreneurs. At that time, I was really struggling, trying to figure out, what direction I was going to go, because I'm very multi-talented, and I just have a lot of gifts. So at that time, I met with Cindy, and she talked about putting together a summit. So that's what we did. So at that time, it was only 2% of women entrepreneurs in this area, Elkhart and in Michigan. And that let us know that it was a problem. And then they said 70% were failing. So we know we had to take some massive action. And when we first met, the first time we met, Cindy said, well, why don't we put together about 30 women and we'll do a summit, we'll have speakers, and we'll provide tips, resources, and strategies. I said, no, Cindy, this is bigger than that. We had over 120 women in our first event. We had like 25 speakers. People came together, and that's what it was about. I often tell people that when I met the women entrepreneurs, I met my real family, because after I met them, I began to grow. Women Entrepreneurs Matter, I have 3 different areas that I focus on. One is homelessness, and homelessness, I can't even think. Entrepreneurship, of course, is one, and then it's something else that deals with poor people, okay? Because I came up poor, I was a teen parent, domestic violence, I should know that, because I've suffered domestic violence from the age of 16 all the way to 43. And to tell it even today, because domestic violence is not just somebody punching you in the face. It's somebody calling you out of your name, so I'm just saying that's just part of our society. But those different things, and then Women Entrepreneurs Matter spawned from the summit. So when we did the summit, we have women all over, and men too, we don't leave men out, but it was our niche, women entrepreneurs. But we have women and men doing things all over this community, and it's really sparked from what we did in 2018. It was a few programs that was going on, but once we got in there and we brought our speakers together, providing tips, resources, funding opportunities, different ways that women could make it out here, where we could support each other. If a woman is down, we can give her a hug, we can pray for her. I myself had to get trauma coaching because I had suffered so much trauma. And that was a woman entrepreneur that I met. So we match them up, I mentor them. I only not just mentor them, but I show them how to mentor others. Like right now, I'm doing a pop-up shop right over here at the Red Barn, Big Goodson Center. And I show entrepreneurs how to do stuff. Cindy, I call Cindy the mother of entrepreneurship here, because she have brought us together and supported so many people, and she don't ask for anything in return. And that's what we want to do, is we want to be able to show women, and I should have started with thanking you all for considering us with this resolution. To the mayor, it's always been a great experience with Mishawaka. I'm from South Bend. Mishawaka is way different from South Bend. I probably should have came to Mishawaka a long time ago. But I just want to thank you all for considering us, and just to let you know that, if you do something like this and have us a part of this great international organization, it would just only help us to continue to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? And thank you, ma'am. We appreciate you being here. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Oh.
My name is Daryl Tilton. I live at the 100 Center High Rise. I'm a retired military personnel and a retired police officer from California. And I got a couple things I would like to talk about that's not on the agenda. One is...
Sir, if I can interrupt you, At this point in time, we're taking comments with regard to the proposed resolution. If you hold tight, there'll be a chance later in the evening for people to speak with regard to general items. So I promise I'll give you the high sign when it's time for you to come forward, but thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of this proposed resolution? Please come forward.
My name is Colleen Keelton, and my address is 1130 Bissell Street in South Bend, Indiana. Regarding women entrepreneurship, I think women are natural entrepreneurs, and we have not, in the history, gotten a lot of support when we asked for help. We just haven't gotten it, and it's not that we don't want to work hard or that we want to stay at home or that our kids are going to interfere. We are very driven. There's nothing stronger than a mother's prayer. And when we add that to business, we're going to explode the entrepreneurial community and bringing that female energy, feminine energy into the entrepreneurial spirit. And we have the balance of the male energy. I mean, I know I'm sounding woo-woo, but you know what? It's true. When we work together, we're much stronger, and celebrating women is going to benefit everyone.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Then thank you, ma'am. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this resolution, please come forward.
Hi, my name is Jamie, and I'm nervous. I'm new. I just started a business with the help of these beautiful young ladies. They gave me the strength, the courage, and the ambition to go ahead with my dream. I just want to say, without them, most of us wouldn't even get out and do it because we're already thinking that we have so much against us being women, being mothers. So they give us a lot of hope and courage to get up and do it. So I thank you guys. I don't know any of you. You don't know me. But I thank you, and I thank these ladies.
Thank you. You did a fine job. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Hello, greetings. Greetings, council. My name is Laquita Hughes. My address is 1422 Marine Street, South Bend, Indiana. I would just like to stand here before all of you to just speak about Ms. Cohen's program. It has been an honor to be a part of her program. I've been in several programs throughout the state of Indiana pertaining entrepreneurship and starting, your first business and things like that. Her program is phenomenal. She has paced, she has connected and collaborated with constituents to provide capital, not only capital, but to provide resources and, community networks to help us throughout our endeavors. And, other programs kind of, you get in those programs, you get the little bulk of it, and then you go. But she has a mentorship program that I feel I've been able to run my business as a child care director and also be a mom. I have a kiddo in college, and also partake in her program through Zoom, and on weekends. So thank you for allowing this proclamation to go forth. She is phenomenal, and I look forward to collaborating with each of you and speaking individually in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else physically present who wishes to speak in favor? Please come forward. I suspected you were going to.
My name is Annie Walker. I'm a big supporter of Women's Entrepreneur here in South Bend. Immediate area for South Bend, Mishawaka, Granger, Bremen, the whole part of Indiana. Basically, I've been helping out Cindy Cohen, Vita, and the other ladies with the different programs, the different events that they put on yearly, every year. I am White Glove Cleaning Services. I do a lot of the Airbnbs here in South Bend, vacation homes, condos in the immediate area. So thanks for having us and taking care of Cindy. She's a wonderful person.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor? Please come forward. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone present who is foolhardy enough who wants to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Thank you. Are there any council members who wish to speak? Mrs. Volker.
Hi, thank you. Cindy, just want to say hello. Good to see you. I think you and I met with WBUM, Women Business Owners in Michiana, a long time ago. So anyway, just want to applaud all of you for your hard work and also for, your recognition of Cindy, who's doing so much for you. But go you. Thanks for coming, and happy to support the resolution.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the council? I will just add, in addition to thanking Cindy Cohen, I want to thank Luann Hazen for also bringing this matter to our attention and helping to move it forward. So with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Beninky?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yep.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Resolution passes 9-0. Resolution R 2022-33, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, approving a form of development agreement among the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, the City of Mishawaka Redevelopment Commission, and Card Associates Athletic Facilities, LLC.
Thank you. We will now open the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-33. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Mr. President, members of council, Ken Prince, Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Mishawaka. I'm excited to be here this evening to speak on this matter. Similar to what we did with the Redevelopment Commission, I know only a few of you were able to attend the Redevelopment Commission, but because we have, this is a complex project, it has multiple pieces of financing and multiple players involved. We would like to give the total presentation immediately off the bat as part of this public hearing to allow a full breadth of questions before we get into the other resolution here before you this evening. So if that's acceptable, Mr. President, I'll proceed.
Hearing no objections, why don't you go ahead and do that?
Great. So the project itself, just for a little background, the site in question where it's looking to be constructed is immediately east of the Judy Creek Golf Course. This is property the city had originally purchased for the reconfiguration of 3 holes of the golf course as part of the city's well field. When we received the bids for the modification of this property into those 3 holes, the price was high enough where we went back to the owners and ended up buying the other property that was appraised at a much higher value because it was less than the cost of the reconfiguration of the golf course. And what that left us with was this 50 acres roughly that we had other opportunity to do things with. Obviously, we pulled out the property needed for the well field itself, and then soon after that happened, the Visit South Bend, Mishawaka, the Convention and Visitors Bureau put out a request for proposals for essentially a regional indoor athletic facility to see what kind of interest, because these facilities obviously have popped up all over the country, and they wanted to identify very specifically the interest in our local communities. So Mishawaka, along with other communities, submitted a response to that RFP, and ultimately our site here in Mishawaka, here next to the Judy Creek Golf Course, was chosen as the most desirable location to locate such a facility. Since that time, that was 4 years ago, we've been working with the developer who also submitted at that time, Carden Associates, regarding the construction of a facility. And we're pleased to present to you at this time the resolutions, the financing associated with that. So without further ado, you don't get to hear from me a lot this evening. You get to hear from the developer and the consultants associated with the project. But just to run through how we're going to present this evening, first, Mayor Wood is going to make a few comments regarding his support of the project. Jeff Jarnecki with the Convention Visitors Bureau will then present the economic impact and why, very specifically, they put out the RFP and are supporting this project. That'll be followed by the developer, Cardin Associates, who will present the scope of the project, what they're looking to do, the time frame, and the details associated with it. That'll be followed by Baker Tilly, who is the City of Mishawaka's financial consultant, who will outline the various options for financing the facility. Again, as I indicated earlier, there are multiple components here that are required to fund the facility. In addition to the dedicated hotel motel tax, the 1% that generates an estimated $960,000 a year to the facility, the developer from operating expenses is contributing, along with the creation of a new tax increment financing district that would allow this for-profit facility to put the taxes that are generated from the property back into it to fund it. Overall, this is a $38 million project, and the developer contribution between both the tax increment financing and the operation expense is roughly $2.4 million a year that they're spending to construct the facility. The City of Mishawaka's portion of this is we've made a commitment to build the extension of Veterans Parkway and the extension of utilities needed to serve the facility, and that we're also bringing the donation of the land as part of our, but in terms of the actual construction of the facility itself, that's being funded through other means. I would also note that the Regional Development Authority, as part of the READY application process, has chosen to award $5.2 million of funding to this project because of how important this project is on a regional basis to not only the City of Mishawaka, but the South Bend Elkhart region as a whole. So with no further, and then I shouldn't, beyond that, last but not least, the person with the heavy lifting to do, Randy Rampola from Barnes & Thornburg, who will be presenting the legal documents that are for your consideration this evening, will be batting cleanup this evening.
Mr. Prince, before you turn over the microphone to His Honor, with the impressive list and long list of speakers that you just went over, the thought occurs that it may become unwieldy for us to defer all our questions at the end. So what I would encourage the council to do is, to the extent that you can hold off those questions, please do so. But my fear is that it'll be tough to try to recreate the order of speakers in response to questions. So I will recognize any questions that people have throughout the proceedings.
Of course, Mr. President. So without further ado, Mayor Wood.
Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood, Mayor, we are about to do a deep dive into this rather complex project, so I'm not going to stand here and try to delve into some minutia and details. I'm going to let we have, as we always do, surrounded ourselves with great team members, from the operator through the consultants who look out for the city and try to dot every I and cross every T to make sure that the city is going to be in good position. You're going to have access to them tonight, and so I'm going to let them cover most of it. But I am here to ask for your support of proposed Resolution 22-33. It's been a long time coming. We've started this process it's been 4 or 5 years ago. With the seed, ultimately went to some site visits and culminated in funding, securing property and funding to the point where we are tonight, which is essentially final approval. This project is important to the city of Mishawaka, and I can't understate that. Many communities are wanting these types of projects. Many will never be able to pull them off. We're unique enough that we are in a position where we can pull it off. Why is it important? Because having been a parent of a couple of students who I have gone all over the country in travel situations for amateur athletics, I see what they've done to communities. Thousands of parents and players descending on facilities in a single weekend, all staying at local hotels, all staying, going to local restaurants, going to local shops, supporting local businesses. Many communities are looking to do these projects. Why? Because they have a lot of green space and they think that maybe if we put the facility in this place, then we'll get some commercial development around it. We're blessed. We have the commercial development. We have what other communities are looking to build. The only thing we're missing is the athletic facility that will then, in turn, help feed some of these things. And when I think about traveling around all those days, nights stayed, it was a rewarding experience, not just for us, not for just for our athletes, but also for the community. Bringing in millions of dollars that they would not otherwise have. I would have to think that that is the difference between some businesses making it and some maybe not. But that being said, this is complex, and we had a philosophy going in. We wanted it, but we didn't want to own it, and we didn't want to manage it, and we didn't want to maintain it. And so, and we also kind of thought it'd be nice if it generated tax revenue for us. So that was tricky. And so we've selected an operator who has experience running these sorts of operations that we have confidence in. And so then we developed the plan. We got partners involved, such as the Visit South Bend Mishawaka team. Then we got partners involved, such as the Inskeep, the Hotel Motel Tax Board, eventually the state of Indiana, and now most recently our Regional Development Authority. All are kicking in funding. So Ken mentioned, Mr. Prince mentioned that the hotel motel tax. 1% of it now, for the very first time in city history, a portion of that is dedicated to the city of Mishawaka, a project in the city of Mishawaka. That's vitally important to the success of this project. We had to change state law for that to happen. Most recently, READY stepped up, the Regional Development Authority. They recognize this as probably one of their top priorities as far as funding projects. So they committed $5 million to it, and then we also had $200,000 committed to another project that, you know, quite frankly, we felt like that money would also be best used for this. So we asked them to transfer the funds to this project, and RDA was willing to do that. But so we wouldn't be here without, first of all, having a great site. This site is uniquely located along the main street of America. The Indiana Toll Road goes from New York to San Francisco. It's also at a very close location to the interchange of Capitol Avenue, State Road 331, with a lot of open development potential in the form of vacant property, which we think that this project will help to further development momentum out there. And then we also have done a feasibility study in partnership with the Hotel Motel Tax Board, as well as the Visit South Bend Mishawaka. That feasibility study said that this project would succeed. So we don't feel like, we think we are ideally situated to see success here. We're in the hole of the donut, as I like to say. There are these kinds of projects in Indianapolis. You will see them in Chicago area. You will see them in Fort Wayne, or you'll see them in Grand Rapids. Other than that, we are sitting right smack dab with full potential to succeed, because a project like this will be going here with no real competition anywhere around it. We hope that it succeeds so much that we anticipate that there could be future phases of this. I will go out on a limb here. I could see and envision this area becoming kind of a sports and entertainment campus, maybe a great anchor for some other activity-related uses out in that area that we have just run our new road through. Speaking of which, we did that. We have full utility access to this site with the idea that we will expand our infrastructure even further and make connections to the site even easier over time. So with that, I'm going to let our consultants get into the deep dive, but I, again, encourage your support of this. We don't enter into this lightly, but we do it knowing with full well with the confidence that we think it will succeed wildly.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Wood? Mr. Compton?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, maybe you or Ken could help me with this. Have we bonded for a private project in the past? And if so, what projects and how, and what type of bonding?
To my knowledge, no. The mill may have had a component of that to it, but this is a unique, this is the first time that we are going down an arrangement of this type.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mayor Wood? Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Mr. Compton, just to clarify that we did do a bond for a private developer, as the mayor stated, for the mill project. It was a different type of bond, but yes, we did bond for essentially the parking garage, the infrastructure, and our commitment to the mill project.
Thank you.
Mr. President, council members, my name is Jeff Jarnicki. I serve as the Executive Director of Visit South Bend, Mishawaka, with an address of 101 North Michigan Street in South Bend. And so I come to you to not only reiterate, but even validate and offer some additional context to Mayor's points that St. Joseph County is a youth sports destination already. We believe that this piece will further elevate not only Mishawaka, but the entire county by drawing more and more folks to this region. And what I mean by that, and to quantify that, in 2019, prior to the pandemic, our agency was responsible for booking more than 54,000 room nights associated with youth sports. Of the work that our team does, and your team does at Visit South Bend, Mishawaka, that constitutes more than 80% of the events that we bring in annually from a CVB perspective, as well as then 89% of the room nights. And so that's largely done without respect to indoor winter sports, one exception being youth hockey. So I'll come back to that St. Joseph County is indeed a youth sports destination. And it was because of that premise that in 2015, our agency sought to further deliver upon that idea, knowing that we're missing that link, as the mayor said, that the opportunity for youth sports in an indoor facility that can not only take care of the winter months, where we see the biggest lag from a hotel occupancy standpoint, but something to operate on a year-round basis. So we identified a partner in Hunden Strategic Partners that came to South Bend, Mishawaka, and conducted a study over a couple of years. And so that took place in 2015. They presented the report in 2016 that identified 5 viable sites within the county. 3 of those sites were in South Bend, and 2 of those sites are in Mishawaka. And to Mayor Wood and Mr. Prince's credit, thankfully they submitted a proposal back that the site that was identified that had the greatest ability to attract and thrive ultimately was the site that's being discussed this evening. And so after great deliberation and intentionality in that strategy, we're pleased to not only support this, but be active partners in helping to deliver this and become a reality here in Mishawaka going forward. Our team works to fill those 54 hotels that we have within St. Joseph County and those 5,300 hotel rooms that we have within those 54 hotels. It's a huge opportunity, and you put on top of that the short-term rental business that ranges anywhere from 800 homes to 1,300 homes in a given night that are available for folks to come in and to enjoy the county and all the amenities that we have here to offer. And so as the mayor mentioned, and Mr. Prince had mentioned, the role of the Hotel Motel Tax Board is critically important in the sense of, in the advent of increasing that hotel rate to 8%. And so that would constitute around $1 million today, but we expect to grow that. We expect to grow that because this facility is expected to bring in 22,500 room nights once opened and stabilized, and have an annual economic impact of nearly $35 million. And so the part for us that we're as excited about is that that destination appeal will ever grow. The ability to welcome more than 600,000 people to Mishawaka, to stay in the hotels here, to eat in the restaurants, to shop in the stores, to support all the wonderful assets that you have here in this community is just incredible. And it's largely because St. Joseph County is a youth sports destination already. This is the missing piece to further accentuate and amplify that opportunity. And so it's not if you build it, they will come, but I will say that we have a proven model here within the county. We have the right support system, the right leadership, and the mayor, Mr. Prince, and the right partners in Cardin Associates to operate this building and bring this to incredible success in the future. So we stand behind it. We stand before you asking for your support to help see this through and further differentiate St. Joseph County and Mishawaka as a youth sports destination.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Mr. Hazen.
Out of the 5,300 rooms, how many are in Mishawaka?
So 24% of the entire inventory resides in Mishawaka. I will say, because of the hotels and where they lie, it does become the part of the epicenter. So as we look at Notre Dame football weekends, youth ice hockey events, and that's the large driver in the winter months, essentially September through March or April in a given year, where we use the 2 sheets at the University of Notre Dame and the 2 sheets at the ice box on the west side of South Bend. We still see a great number of participants and fans and parents and guests stay in Mishawaka for those events as well.
What was the total revenue you think it will bring in? 35 million?
34.5 million is the anticipated economic impact.
Do you break that down? Can you tell us how much that will be in Mishawaka or not?
That I would defer to Andy and to Billy from Cardin Associates during their presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the council? Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. President and Council. I am Andy Card, founder and CEO of Cardin Associates. Our offices reside at 10475 Cross Point Boulevard in Fishers, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46256. Sorry, I had to look. We just moved in and I don't have it memorized. I want to thank you all for having us here this evening, and I also would like to thank Mayor Wood, Kim Prince, staff, all the third parties that are involved. As it's been said previously, we've been working on this for almost 5 years now. So we come to you this evening asking you for your support. I believe pretty well polished and informed. So that's my job here tonight, is to answer any questions any of you may have regarding the development side and the operations. I've already heard a couple. So Oscar just passed out to you all a hard copy of the presentation. I won't go through and read it to you all tonight, but the gist of the project is, just stand by, let me get my notes here. Okay, so we plan on construction approximately a 230,000 square foot facility. It will approach the 300,000 square foot when we add all the support to it, which will be tenant space and like businesses that will support the facility, like recovery, medical office space, et cetera. And I can get into those details here in a little bit. But for all intents and purposes, it's a 230,000 square foot facility. It's made up of 90,000 square feet of hardwood space, which equals 10 basketball courts and equates to 20 volleyball courts. 19 volleyball courts. 62,000 square feet of turf space, which is free span, which is 2 football fields under one roof with no columns. That will also be used not only for turf sports, soccer, baseball, softball, but will also be used for a convention space that we can activate with our flooring system, which we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We have 7,500 square feet of pitching and hitting tunnels that we use for our training for basically beginner through rec and travel programs, as well as we attract many D1 players, both in softball and baseball, as well as pro athletes. that will train and practice in this facility. In addition to that, we will have approximately 30,000 square feet of tenant space, which I mentioned earlier. A lot of this will be predicated on the hospital partner that we are working with. Names like Franciscan, et cetera, are some of the people we're in conversation with. They find interest in these buildings because, as we mentioned earlier, we're moving around 60 to 65,000 people a month through the front door. That's their customer base. So again, we expect the tenant space to be fully leased, which helps cover the cost of the financing in the project. So with that, I think everything else has been stated. A little bit of history about Cardin Associates briefly. We've been at this now for a little over 12 years. We have 3 facilities open, a 4th that just started construction, and 17 more in the pipeline, including this project. So we have experience, obviously, in this space. We're not only in Indiana, we're also developing in Florida, Las Vegas, Colorado, Texas, et cetera. So we feel that we come to you with experience and well-rounded. As I like to tell everybody, really our secret sauce is our operations. You know, architects can draw these things up, general contractors can build them, but the real test is who's going to operate it and who's going to sustain it and who's going to make sure that it's a success. Well, that's the operations folks. We just happen to turn this into a fully vertically integrated business. So not only do we work on the financing and the land purchase and all the discussions that have happened up here in Mishawaka over the last 4+ years, we also are involved in the construction, the design, as well as we stay and we operate the facility. So I think that's really important for everyone to understand. We are not really like any other company that does this. A lot of them build them. The cities will build them and then they'll hire somebody to come run them, or a parks department or something like that. But we are fully integrated and involved, not only in operations, but financially as well. So we're bringing our own money to the project, in addition asking this council and this city for help. So we're kind of all in the canoe rowing together, so to speak. Somebody asked earlier regarding the hotel rooms and kind of how the tourism works. About 60% of our people come from travel, but the majority of our revenue, the other side, 60%, actually serves the local kids. So not only does this help put heads in beds, which, you know, is really where this conversation started when non-Notre Dame type sports or other travel, you know, things are not going on. How do we keep these hotel rooms full, and how do we bring more development? Well, it's through this. And so we have relationships with Nike, Under Armour. We have 2 seats on the NBA, junior NBA board, and the list goes on and on and on. So we have those relationships that we're going to bring with us from our other facilities, and that equates to the tourism numbers that you've heard about tonight. But I am also personally, I have a very personal mission to make sure that we serve the local communities as well. And so as I talked with one of the councilmen, or several at the last meeting, I make sure everybody that wants to be in this facility and have an experience is able to do so. And we work that through the local church organizations, the Boys and Girls Club. You have a very powerful not-for-profit called 5 Star that has over 8,000 kids in their program. So it's through organizations like that that we ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to be in the facility. They may be playing on Friday night instead of a Saturday morning, but everybody gets the opportunity. The second part of that is we open the facility up, especially in the summertime, so we welcome people to come in and use the facility as a cool place to walk and be inside, and that's at no charge. So we have really good relationships with the senior community, especially if you have a Del Webb type organization here. We have a whole group that works with those folks. And so they're not going to the mall. They can come to our place and have a big facility to walk around. So those are just some of the other things that we do from a philanthropy side. We're not just here to, just to have a business, although you have to make money in these facilities to pay the bills. But we really want to be a pillar of the community and part of the community in many different fashions and in many different ways. So I'll just kind of open it up for questions now. If I forgot something, please ask me. I love to talk about this, so please send them to me. This is my passion, and it's been 4.5+ years to get here, so we take all the time we want tonight.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Card? Mr. Mamalante.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Card, for your very detailed presentation and your interest in this project in Mishawaka. Through your presentation, you answered my number one question, is how the kids of the local area in Mishawaka that don't participate or can't afford travel sports, how are they going to be able to access this facility? And I think you explained that very well. Thank you very much. Just a couple quick questions. You said the indoor turf area will not have any pillars in it, will have no division of pillars. What is the roof? Is that going to be a dome, or how is it going to be a hard surface?
Yeah, no, it's a hard surface. You have to stay away from domes and temporary spaces like that for safety. Quite frankly, you'll never get insurance for them, so we have to go out and put in steel, metal roofs. I believe, Billy, correct me if I'm wrong, we're at peak, we're at about 60 feet. So you can imagine that's 6 stories, and that's how we're able to play indoor softball, little league games. And actually, the space can be divided up into almost 6 fields. So there'll be a major divider in there when there's not one single like D1 college game going on. We can separate the fields into smaller fields with temporary fencing. And that really was one of the things that took me so long. It took us over 2 years to engineer these buildings so they wouldn't fall down. If you can imagine, they move about 12 to 14 inches with deflection. So they have to be constructed, and it's very important, obviously, that we don't have columns, because that's how you play these sports. But the biggest thing is, what you all are also gaining is a convention space, that when travel sports slow down, what we do is we activate a carbon flooring system that we move around facilities. So we bring in baseball card shows, antique auto shows, antique shows, wrestling matches, taekwondo tournaments, and it goes on and on and on. And that's how we're able to keep, especially in the slower times, people in your hotel rooms beyond just being reliant on youth sports.
Okay, thank you very much. And my next question, being a fairly new hockey dad, I see on this diagram, phase 2 hockey rinks. Twofold. When would you begin to start phase 2, and will that be 100% undercover, indoor?
Okay, so the first thing is we had hockey in the conversation very early on, and just through the process of being able to get the project and development done, we had to come to a crossroads on whether or not we were going to do hockey in phase 1 or phase 2. And just due to the recent cost hike and some other things, we made the decision to go with all courts and turf for now, because the mission is to get people in the hotel rooms, heads and beds. We do have a phase 2 plan. I've been working with Jeff on, folks over at the University of Notre Dame. The hockey is still in the conversation. However, I think we need to get this done, get this development agreement done, and then move on to other things. We're also in conversations with a couple colleges for an outdoor championship field that's turfed. Bethel's one of those colleges that are coming to us. But it really will come down in the future to the funding and how we can justify spending that. to put hockey in would be almost as much money as what we're doing today just for 2 sheets of ice. So, you know, it's gone from $16 million to 2 years ago to north of $30 million. And with Mayor Wood's leadership and Ken's leadership, we just made a decision on what is best for the community and what is best to support your hotels. Because I deliver what I say I'm going to do, and I'm not convinced right now with the cost the way they are that hockey could do that. There's just not enough hours in the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hazen.
Just hours of operation, what will they be?
Okay, so hours of operation vary depending on what's going on with the schools. So in the summertime, we open about 8 o'clock in the morning. We do a significant amount of summer camps during the day, and these are full camps where parents can drop their children off and leave them the whole day and know that they're safe, they're being active, they're being fed correctly. So in the summertime, when school is not in session, we go from about 8 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night. During school year, which is the best way to explain it, the facility really is loaded on the weekdays from about 3:30 till 10 at night, and on the weekends, it's from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. So it just has to do, it's kind of the bowling alley principle, right? You know, what do we do in our dwell time? And that's when we get into some of these other activities with the seniors or other folks that can come to use the facility during the day. We build garage doors for our medical partners so they can activate on the courts and turf for rehab. You know, I mean, we have x-ray machines. It's full surgery, rehab, and x-ray is the kind of health care that will be brought to this facility for everyone, not just the athletes.
So I don't know if you can answer this or not. How many hours a day do you have to be at full revenue, I guess, to break even? What do you, in other words, if you're going to give some days or to the kids locally, how many hours do we have to fill every day to make it profitable for you?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I can answer it with hours, but it's a combination of multiple revenue streams. You cannot just build a facility like this and rent courts. It will never work. It'll be a disaster. The facility will be bankrupt. So what we have to do is we have to create multiple revenue streams within the facility in order to make sure that we contribute to the debt as we said we have. So it's not so much about hours of the day, it's the hours of the day you're open and when you're open. And the trick really is to fill that dwell time. And it's not whether it's 8 till 10 or 3:30 to 10, it's during the peaks and valleys of the tournament travel season. So to give you an idea, basketball starts about the middle of April, and it runs strong all the way through about July 4th. And then you go back out of your tournaments into your local leagues and those types of things. But then volleyball starts, and then gymnastics starts, and then lacrosse and rugby come in after baseball and softball are over. So it's that combination of experience that we have in keeping the facility full to create the revenue, but I probably can't really tell you specific hours unless I know it's tournament season. But it's back to what I said. Leagues, 3:30 till 10 when school's in session. We're open for camps, then leagues and travel on in the summertime.
Thank you.
Another thing I mentioned, flag football is probably our fastest growing sport, and so that's on the opposite times of baseball and softball. And we will bring with us a sponsorship in the Colts, so that has gotten very popular. We have sold out every league before we even had the other facilities built. So there's just, it's all, and really who we serve is the sports like rugby, lacrosse, those club sports that don't get the time that they want in the schools, because quite frankly, football and baseball and basketball in the schools are bigger revenue generators. So those kids, they're practicing, you know, outside and it's 10 degrees below zero, or they're inside a church with carpet, you know, so that's another thing that these facilities do. They really help relieve the pressure for all sports for the school system.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Card, for your presentation.
as a parent, grandparent, and great-grandparents, I'm really excited about this facility, what it's going to do for the community and what it's going to do for our students and that. But you've talked about all the square footage and everything like that, but you've never mentioned anything about viewing stands for parents. How is that, how do parents go to your facility and watch their kids or their grandkids and that? Do they have to stand?
You said viewing, excuse me, viewing?
Well,
Yeah.
watch them participate.
So we go to great pains to make sure that everybody can watch in a couple different ways. One, we will have a championship court in this facility that will hold approximately 3,000 to 3,500 people on a championship court, but each court in itself can hold, I'm going to guess, 1,000, 500 to 1,000, depending on how we activate the space. And it's really important that you also understand this facility will have a mezzanine in the middle of it. And we build that mezzanine for a couple different reasons. One, for viewing, but it's also a lot less expensive for us to build the facility without columns. We have to have this massive mezzanine in the front. So that mezzanine in this facility, it's about 10,000 square feet. So you can imagine all of that viewing area up there, and then we will have other like businesses. For example, we have a company called Shoot 360. It is a golf simulator on steroids for basketball. So that'll be up there, but also plenty of viewing. There'll be grandstands around all of the courts. Now, when you get to the turf, we have a combination of both. We have grandstands that's around the perimeter of the turf, but it's also kind of like going to an outdoor soccer field maybe that you've visited with your grandkids or kids today. You bring your own chair, and you can kind of sit where you want. So if you want to be down on the field or around the protection, you can sit there. You can sit in the grandstands, you can sit up on the mezzanine. Our problem has never been seating. Well, I'm not going to say that. For big events, we tend to run out. Parking's our bigger deal, which we pay a lot more attention to. So we have most of this ground, or a lot of this ground, will be used for parking to make sure that we can park appropriately, and then people can come inside and view. But viewing's not something I get a complaint on, to be honest with you. There'll be plenty of room. The other thing that we do is we have a partner. Let's just say, Councilman, that you're on vacation in Denver, Colorado, and your grandchild is playing on the court or on the turf. We have an HD high-quality camera that you can go onto your phone or your computer or even onto your TV and watch that game. There's a way to sign in for a membership and log in, and you can actually view it from anywhere in the world. And we are very cutting edge with that technology. The cameras keep getting better and better. We're not quite to if you're watching an NBA game, but they do move back and forth and go in and out, and it just gets better every year. So that's another way that you can watch the game if you don't want to actually come to the facility.
Thank you. Answered my question. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Compton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Card, for the presentation. I appreciate it. I sent you an email earlier today with a couple of questions, and they were in response to some of your comments at the Redevelopment Commission. One of those was you were asked about your use of labor to construct this facility. And I believe your comment was that you have a project manager that you use, but you hire local subcontractors. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's a little more detailed than that, but
yeah.
go ahead and finish your
Okay.
thought.
And my question is, and as I said, how can we reassure? How can you give me assurance and us assurance that it'll be local labor? My thought is, as we put it right in the development agreement, I suggested 95%. I'm open to discussion on that. And your comment was that it wouldn't be good for either party to put it in the agreement. Can you help me understand why it wouldn't be?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a whole cost thing. It would not make any sense to try to import labor from anybody anywhere else, even if it's Indianapolis. It's cost prohibitive. You can't put those folks up. you have to have the support, quite frankly, from the local contractors. And one of the reasons why we use national partners like Meyer Najum, who's our partner on this, who's based out of Indianapolis, is because they already have representation up here and they have offices where we go. We also have used Hagerman, Shield Sexton. It just depends on who you're talking about. But I am very careful to choose the right general contractor, and quite frankly, I'm the general contractor too. So we're doing about half of the necessary work that's done to get this built, more from a, not from necessarily a construction standpoint, but from design. That's all us. During construction, making sure that costs are being under control. So really the way you can check me up, number one, is I've got a budget I got to meet, and it won't make any sense for me to try to import labor here. My bigger concern is, do you have the labor here that can do it? In this environment, it's not good to try to put down on paper or in words to say, we need to do this, this, and this. It's not that I'm afraid to do it, but what are the ramifications if I don't? I mean, it's not me. It's not that I'm worried about, again, using the labor here. I'm worried that it's here. And in this environment, the capacity and the shortage of good labor, it's real. And I think I mentioned to you in my comment, in my response to you, Miller Eads, for example, is a union shop out of Indianapolis. They're a large mechanical, electrical mechanical company. They've been around a long time. They're a union shop. They're doing big jobs like Federal Express. And the way that I'm able to use that union labor is they give us concessions. So when I go and they price themselves out, we work with work with the local union reps to adjust their fees in order for them to be on the job. And they've met our needs every single time. From the electrical is just an example. So I guess that's probably the best example and reasons I can
Well,
give.
I really didn't hear the answer to my question, which is, what is the detriment? I think it belongs in the development agreement. That is the contract between us and you on how this is going to happen. I disagree with you on out-of-town labor. I've seen it time and time again come into this community and displace local labor at a much cheaper rate, at a much discounted rate than what the local labor is doing at. That's why it happens. And that's why, in my thought, that's why we need that in this. You know, I'm not asking, I can appreciate, I know you did your homework on me, and I can appreciate why you mentioned Miller Eads and who they are and what they do, and I appreciate that. I know of Meyer Najum. And these contractors are going to do what they need to do to get that building built, local or out of town, unless we tell them that this is what they have to do.
No, that's not exactly true. That's why I am half the general contractor.
Then we should be able to put that in there. If you are running the
There's no way
show,
I
then
could
let's
ever
put this
agree
in the
to a
development.
percentage that's going to make you feel comfortable, and I just can't do it. And it's not because I'm worried about using the local labor, it's because I'm worried that it's not here. So what happens if I don't, you meet your percentage, and it's not because of me, it's because it's not here? Then what's the ramification? So it's a rhetorical question. My point is I've never had anybody put that in a development agreement over the 12 years I've been doing this, because it doesn't matter. And I encourage you to reach out to some of the other council members in some of these other cities or these mayors, and they will confirm to you that I support the local labor.
And I appreciate that. What you're asking me to do and us to do is to approve 25 years of guaranteed financing. We've never done that. We heard that earlier. This is big. This is important. And it is so important that these are the kind of things I think we need, along with, you mentioned earlier, local kids being able to participate. I'd like to see that in writing in some fashion. I don't know how that would look. The labor portion is pretty easy, but for me personally, I'm not opposed to this. I think it's a great idea. I think it could be very good for a lot of our businesses. How good it is for the citizens of Mishawaka, I'm still trying to compute, to people in my district, how is this good for them? Unless we can get guarantees that they're going to work on it and they can go to it. I will tell you, we've had much larger construction projects than this recently, multi-year construction projects, some at Notre Dame, some not, that are done and get completed, and there's not a manpower issue. Is labor tight? Sure it is. It's tight all across this country. But the labor is here, the people are here, and I don't see any big jobs on the horizon that is going to take it away from, that's going to soak up our
I have a
our employment staff.
$450 million project in Lebanon, Indiana, and it's a real problem. They're not here, they're not there. Despite inflation, despite what's going on, quite frankly, I'm lucky to have Meyer Nachum because they've already booked out for the rest of next year. Part of the reason why we're here tonight trying to expedite is we are in our issues aren't whether or not who I'm going to use or where I'm going to use from my standpoint. It's that this facility, by the end of December, will be $9 million more than it is today. And that's because there is a labor shortage. I can't even guarantee without making personal commitments today to my contractors and my suppliers that I'll even get steel. If you haven't ordered steel for 2023, you're not getting it. If you haven't ordered PVC pipe. So I appreciate where you're coming from, but I assure you in this environment, Andy, cannot import labor from anywhere else to get this done. It's not what we do. We don't buy our light fixtures from overseas. We don't import, migrant labor, okay? We use the subs and the quality that's in the town. I have to, or I can't deliver the product to you that meets my gold standard. And I wish I could make you feel better, but I don't see a way to put these numbers in percentages because we can put anything you want in agreement, but what's the ramifications? And I can't agree to any ramification because I disagree with you on the labor, 100%. I'm in it. I'm dealing with it right now in other areas, not only in Indiana, and it's a problem.
Well, you mentioned the project in Lebanon. If it was $450 million you were doing here, I would tend to agree with you. But this isn't that big of a project for this area.
Well, it's going to be really close to that when you conclude what the landowners around me are going to bring and do with development. The difference between here and what I do other places is I own the land around it. Here, we had a landowner that was very agreeable to sell the ground to the city and make this deal happen because I know what's coming afterwards.
And it will. If your project is successful, it will after your project is done.
Sir, I think I've answered your questions. I don't know what else I can do for you.
My one last question is, if we delayed this development agreement tonight to a future meeting when we could negotiate more on these issues that I've talked about, what does that do to your project?
It probably won't go forward, and I will walk away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Compton. Mrs. Volker.
Hi, thank you, Mr. President. Hi, Mr. Card, thank you. I missed the meeting last week. I had another obligation, so I appreciate, going through the detail of this. But I just wanted to clarify, when you were talking about the Boys and Girls Club and the Five Star, is that right? Organization, are you providing donations to the Boys and Girls Club that allow them to, how does it work?
So it's a combination of things. I'll give you an example. We have a group in our Westfield facility. It's about 500 kids. It's a group called Student Impact, okay? That is most of the children and kids in that program from elementary school up through high school don't have the financial means nor the desire, quite frankly, to be in a league that's not within their peers. So what we do is we make the facility available in Westfield, which is the Pacers Athletic Center, and we bring them in. They get the same experience. They get referees, they get the beautiful facility, everything that comes with it, but they play on Friday night. Why do they play on Friday night? Because I basically can give them the facility for free versus charging them the quote-unquote normal fee. So that's one way we do it. When we bring a tournament into town, this facility will not be able to house everything. So we go out to the schools, we go out to the Boys and Girls Club, and we rent their courts. So for example, I've spent over $500,000 with the Boys and Girls Club as a customer to rent their courts and provide additional courts so we can bring these massive tournaments into town. So that's another way that we support them. That's probably the two biggest ways.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. DeMay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening. To follow up on Mrs. Volker and Mr. Emmons' questions, what is the cost per use for a travel team, say, and then the admissions for the parents and grandparents to the facilities?
Okay. It just depends on the tournament. Sometimes, for example, with Nike, they take over the whole facility. So they may pay a flat fee, and then they're in charge of the gate. And so I'm not really involved other than I'm kind of a barometer to make sure that it's not too crazy. But these are national large companies that are doing this all over the country, not just in our facility. So in a situation like that, it could be as much as $25 for the weekend, okay? During normal league play, I give a discount to seniors. If you're 55 or older, you get a discount, which is 50% off the gate fee, which right now is $6, so seniors pay $3. Athletes and coaches do not pay. So when you're in the tournament or you're in the league, we have a way to monitor so they're not double dipped. So that's another part of it. But typically the admission fee for a regular league event is $6. And that's how we use mainly that money for the referees, which, to answer your question further, Mr. Compton, the part-time jobs that we will create here are significant. They average $25 an hour. They're great jobs. The kids like the jobs. We don't have the same issues and problems that a fast food chain might have. We have adults that are interested in exercising, and they may referee, 10 games on a weekend, and they just made an extra, $250, or they may do 30 games in a weekend. And then when these other large tournaments come in, like I'm talking about, we typically have to bring in an additional 120 employees. And Nike and Adidas and Three Step and all these people, they foot the bill. So we make them pay for this extra labor. We just organize for it and manage the labor for them. But that's generally the cost.
I can tell you that my grandson is in travel baseball, and we pay that now, $6, $10, a game.
Okay. Well, we're a lot cheaper, down in Grant Park, which I'm in the process of buying, they'll get $2,500 to $4,000 a team for a weekend. We don't even come close to that in indoor basketball. It's less than $1,000. And so, again, we have to make money, we have to be profitable, but I'm going to take these tournaments away from places like Chicago, Atlanta, because they're going to want to come here, not so much because we're cheaper, but the hotel room infrastructure and the restaurants are here, which is what Mayor Wood alluded to. This is reverse of what we normally do. Most cities or towns and communities bring us in because they're trying to attract what you all already have. What we're trying to do is fulfill even more bedroom nights during non-Notre Dame quote-unquote sporting events and bring even more development with hotels. I mean, we take down, I think we've been conservative. I think we'll be north of 25,000, maybe 30,000 room nights with this facility because the stats we gave you are off smaller facilities. This facility is the largest we've ever built until we go build Las Vegas. And so it'll be, I think these numbers, we are under-promising are going to overserve. But to your point, that's the cost.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Mamalante.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you again. One quick follow-up question that I didn't think of before. But as you're well aware, emotions run high in leagues and in tournaments on the court and in the stands as well. What are your plans for security?
So safety is paramount to us. One of the other things that we will do is we will be a great off-hours gig for your police department. And so we always have an officer on duty during tournaments, and it's usually 4. We have 2 controlling the parking lot. We have 2 inside. We park the squad cars in a very visible location, and I do not put up with any BS. You start that crap in one of my facilities yelling from the stands, your butt's out. In fact, I walk around with money in my pocket, and I'm at most major events, and I will hand you your gate fee back and politely ask you to leave the facility. I don't tolerate it. Because it's not so much that most facilities don't ramp it up fast enough. They let it get out of control, and before you know it, you've got a situation that's intolerable. The other thing we're doing because of our relationship with the Pacers, we're working on magnetometers. And so right now, it's kind of cost prohibitive, but the technology, like any other technology, keeps getting better and better. So I see a day in the very near future, maybe by the time this facility opens, you're walking through a metal detector, and we have already started talking about going to clear purses and certain sizes that we can see and inspection. Not quite there yet. That's a new thing for youth sports, but usually with the NBA or the NFL is doing it, it usually trickles down to us. It's just a matter, and there's no price on safety, don't get me wrong, but I can tell you we're the safest facilities that I know of that I've ever visited. If you went to some of these tournaments like some of these folks, it would shock you. But it's real, and that's the day we live in. But that's the answer. We're working towards, and actually there's technology there that scans the room. So you don't even have to walk through a booth anymore. It'll scan out over a populated area when they're coming through the vestibule, and it'll detect things that you don't want in your facility.
And I know it's very difficult for you to project this or give some sort of estimate, but with you residing in Fishers or the Indianapolis area, how often do you foresee yourself walking around with a pocket full of money in some of these
personally?
tournaments? Yes.
Well, I can't really answer that, but I will be here. I will tell you for the first couple years, yeah, my butt will be right up here in Mishawaka because I got a big investment too. This just isn't about you all. And I cannot have, and I will not allow one of these to fail. There's no universe that you're going to get this facility back. I'm just going to tell you. It ain't going to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Card? Well, sir, I appreciate your patience with us as we've asked you a fair number of questions, and thank you for your interest in Mishawaka and for your passion for what you do. That's very evident. A couple of questions from my standpoint. You've mentioned your facility in Grant Park and the work that you do in Indianapolis. At the Redevelopment Commission, you expanded that and talked a little bit more about your other facilities and maybe some future plans. So can you share some more information with the council about what you have currently built and that you're operating, and then what your plans, in particular throughout northern Indiana, are for other expansion sites?
Sure. So first of all, when I started this venture, 11, 12 years ago on a cocktail napkin in a Mexican restaurant after my boys' high school game, Grant Park was just a theory. And I was actually the first building out there that I bought the ground from the city didn't own. So we own the Pacers Athletic Center. We just happen to now be taking it over because of our success rate and our experience. They have realized that they need a professional operator to take over the entire park. So my vision is, and part of getting there is with my other facilities, we have always, the facilities before this one, not the ones going after, we've literally been out in a cornfield, and I'm not kidding you, there's nothing within 3 miles of what we're doing, mainly because of land cost. We were new, we weren't proven, nobody knew who Card and Associate was or who Andy Card was. And so over the years, we've proven, you know, we're bringing over 1 million visitors through our facility in Grant Park. That TIF has gone from 0 to $192 million in 5 years, and those aren't coincidences. Now, I'm not going to stand here and take credit for you, but I don't believe in coincidence because it happened in Noblesville, it's happening in Pendleton, and it's getting ready to happen in Lebanon. They're already coming. So this facility will be sold out before we ever open the front door. And the issue is in order for me to be competitive, I have to have your assistance. I can't Everybody's like, oh, you're the rich developer, Andy, you're making so money. These facilities don't make a lot of cash as you go along. But what they do is create all this revenue for the town. So you're talking $35, $40 million. I have to have you help me share in that before it comes so we can get it built. Then it shows up. But long way around with everything else. For example, and I told you about the TIF in Westfield going from 0 to 192 million. My opinion is if we were running that, it'd be twice that, it'd be 400 million. In Noblesville, we've been open 4 years, counting COVID, which, by the way, my facilities made it. Okay, I didn't go out of business like 80% of the other facilities. So we know a little bit about what we're doing. But now there's 2,000 homes going across the street, including empty nester, millennial housing. The restaurants that have popped up when I started working with Simon, we're so busy. There's 22 restaurants that call us every weekend and want to know what we're doing so they can staff accordingly. So these are vacuums for businesses because parents want to live by them, which means good workers are there, which means companies want to come to your city and be here because that's where the employees are. The teachers want to teach here because the kids want to be in the facilities, and it's this constant trickle effect. And then the multifamily housing and the single-family housing, and it just rolls down, you know, just like this. And that's why I applaud Mayor Wood. He gets it. He sees the vision, and not just for future, but man, this is just going to prop up what you already have in a big, big, big way.
I appreciate that, but back to my original question, let me be a little bit more specific. My understanding from our conversation and your presentation at the Redevelopment Commission, and there was even a reference to it earlier this evening, is that you anticipate another facility that you're going to develop in Fort Wayne. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then are you also anticipating future development in Northwest Indiana, the region in between Mishawaka and Chicago? So hearkening back to the feasibility study from 2015 and 2016 that was referenced earlier, how does the creation of those two new facilities impact the feasibility of this Mishawaka site?
If anything, it enhances it. So if you look at our facilities in Indianapolis, I have 4 facilities within 12 miles of each other the way the crow flies. As far as future development, yes, we're working with the city of New Haven and Fort Wayne. We are actually here today, and we're going to get a deal done there. But as far as there will be no more facilities up here from me. And I don't believe anybody will come up to this area and try to compete with this project. The last facility I'm doing in Indiana, besides the New Haven facility, will be in the Greenwood, Johnson County area of Indianapolis. Then we are done with Indiana. We may enhance or we may build more like we are in Noblesville. We're working with a certain MBA team to do a $30 million expansion on the side. So there may be some of that stuff. I'd love to see hockey here. I'd love to see hockey come to this development. But as far as competition and, you know, the facilities eating each other, it won't happen. In fact, what will happen in the summer is if Nike's in Indianapolis at that facility the week of August 1st, they're going to be up here the following week doing the same thing up here in this facility.
And I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to get off this line of questioning in a
Okay.
second. But Fort Wayne, you touched on.
Okay.
Talk about the region. Talk about Northwest Indiana and any plans that you have to develop there. If you mentioned it, I missed it, and I'll
Yeah,
apologize.
no, I don't have any other plans to develop in Northwest Indiana. There was a facility
Okay.
for a long time in Maryville. I do get Chicago. There's 2 or 3 counties that call me every year. I'm very particular about who I work with, and I apologize if that's arrogant, but we're saying no 5 times more than we're saying yes. We're very metric-oriented. We believe in our metrics, and we track them ourselves. I mean, I can tell you how many hot dogs I sold last night, okay? And I can tell you how many I think I'm going to sell when the tournament comes. I know that the volleyball folks like different food than the baseball folks. And so all that stuff, all those metrics may seem silly, but this is a very complex business from an operations standpoint. That's why There's been facilities, they just don't make it, or they're mismanaged. And that's why, you know, Nike and these other folks will come there. But I have no intention, and I can't see a scenario where I would build another facility in Northwest Indiana.
Okay. Well, I don't think you have to apologize for that attention to detail and having high standards. That's what
Well,
makes
it's a
the
lot of
investment
money.
that
I'm
much
not
more
a fool.
attractive.
Okay,
Right.
I know this is a big deal. I've been doing this a long time, and so I get it. But I can't afford to cannibalize off of each facility. We just can't do it.
With regard to the operation of the facility, not as much in conjunction with the athletic portions of the building, but with regard to that other space that you talked about in partnership with the hospitals and what have you, is it safe for us to assume that there is not going to be any sale of alcohol at this facility?
I can't tell you that. We have our liquor license in all the facilities, and believe it or not, it took me 5 years to convince my management to do it. But it's not like we're giving you a bucket of Bud Light and go get trashed. What we do is it's very controlled. It's only certain times of the day, and it's expensive. It's $8 cans of craft beer. No hard alcohol. Wine is in a can. Now, I guess I'm not opposed to not doing it, to not having it, if you all do. But we do sell alcohol in all of our other facilities.
Okay.
And we're 2 years in it since post-COVID, and I have not had an incident. Parents are just idiots. They don't need alcohol to be idiots. And I don't play around. I'm just telling you, you're out.
Yeah, don't read too much
I
into
was
my
one
question.
of those idiots, by the way, just so you know.
I'm not advocating for a particular outcome. I'm just asking a question
Yeah,
for
we do
clarification.
have our
And
liquor license.
and I don't run these type of facilities, but I know you're not selling a bucket of beer and letting them carry it in there.
Well,
So
and
I get that much.
it's more because we do large catering events. So one of the things we do is Shepherd Insurance, for example, is a big insurance carrier in Indianapolis. I think they're even up here. They'll bring 500 people in and rent the facility and have their Christmas party. And we activate sports on the courts and competitions. And so really, I got it more there, because what we will have inside is we will have a caterer on site that operates out of this building. So I'm not serving just hot dogs and nachos like I told you. It's quality food that we control, and typically we bring the caterer in to help manage the food, but also to control the quality, and then they save money because they don't have separate brick and mortar. So it works out for everybody.
Sure. In the development agreement and then in Exhibit B to the development agreement, and you made reference to this at the redevelopment commission meeting as well, there's a reference to the memorandum of understanding and the letters of intent that you have in place with, and the phrase was local operators in Exhibit B. Can you talk a little bit more about those relationships that you already have in place and how that helps to build out your business model here in
Sure.
Mishawaka?
Well, because we've been working on this facility for so long, we're already in partnership with most of the local operators here that are of size, especially as it relates to the major sports, volleyball, basketball, baseball, softball. So we've been talking to those folks. The money's already leaving your city and coming down to Indianapolis for tournaments, which you know, we want to remain here, and we want those hotel rooms to be here. But what we normally get in the beginning is, oh my gosh, this 800-pound gorilla's coming to town. They're going to run us out of business, and it's quite the contrary. I doubt you'll hear any remonstration from here because we've been at it so long, because we're already in conversations. We need those folks in our facility. We're not trying to chase them away. We're trying to enhance a facility so those kids and those coaches have a first-class facility to play in. And oh, by the way, when we bring our IYBL league up here, which stands for Indiana Youth Basketball League, one of the things we do is we don't charge those local teams for the tournaments in most cases. So we make the out-of-towners coming in pay for the rental, so to speak, and if you're in our league or with one of our partners' leagues, your team's in the tournament for free. Now, it's not every case, but the lion's share.
So that term of art in your world, local operators, that refers to club teams and others who sponsor youth
Absolutely.
activities. So a youth hockey league, a youth volleyball league, or an individual club team.
Absolutely.
That
All
it
of
runs the gamut.
Absolutely.
In round numbers, how many of those type of agreements, MOUs, letters of intent do you have in place at this point in
I
time?
think we provided a dozen, maybe. I can't remember.
Not to us, you didn't, but.
About 5. We provided 5 so far, because I have to be really careful. Because like right now, I have to be booking Nike and all those tournaments now for 2023.
Sure.
Back to your point. Like 2023 is booked. We're solid. So I'm booking now for 2024. So they got to know that I'm going to be open. So Nike and Adidas and all these local tournament guys know they don't have to leave and go to Atlanta or to Chicago. They can stay right here. But I can't really pursue it until we have a development agreement.
That
I
makes
know I
perfect
can
sense.
build this in 11 to 12 months. That I can tell you.
Okay. So when you say that you provided those underlying documents, who did you provide those to?
Billy?
No, I'm just thinking.
Oh, we haven't given it to the city, but we do have those executed, though.
Okay.
I did that to know that I got the support before I come up here to build it.
Not this evening, because it wouldn't be fair to ask you to pull them out of your
Okay.
back pocket. I'm sure you don't carry them around like that. But before I vote on the issuance of the bonds, I'd like to see those.
No problem. I can tell you it represents about 15,000 kids. I do know that from my.
And that's exactly what I'm looking for, to try to,
It's about 15,000 local kids within, when we did the feasibility study, we look at travel from minutes. We don't look at demographics, really. It's how easy is it to get in and out of the facility with carpooling and the demands of children? How easy is it to get in and out of the facility, and who are we impacting? So we draw on these facilities, the majority of our kids come from about a 30-minute radius is the lion's share. And if my memory serves me correct, just from the local kids we know about, there's 15,000, and I haven't even begun. I mean, Five Star has 8,000 kids.
I'm familiar with that group. And please understand, neither my questions, or I'm going to go so far as to say the questions of my colleagues, are evidence of any distrust. But we have an obligation to this community to do our due diligence. So
I've done this more times than you can imagine.
I suspect you have been down this road before, so I'm glad to know that. You can put it in the proper perspective. Let's talk about schools then. How are local school corporations, beyond the students who participate via Five Star and those other groups, what are the opportunities that are presented to local school corporations to partner with you, your facility, and to gain access?
Well, one, we work very close with the ADs and the principals and the superintendents. And Brandon, my COO, who's not here today, has already made a lot of those connections. So we go right to the schools, and typically we put the coaches on a retainer of some type, so they're involved in the facility as a part-time employee. And it just creates that relationship to where we're all working together. The schools really love us because that's one of our biggest suppliers of capacity for additional courts or fields. So when we, talk about bringing these massive amount of tournaments in and people, typically the older kids will play in this facility. So for example, you're going to see the top 4,000 juniors in the United States playing in this facility, all D1 prospects, and all the coaches, okay? So then we go out to the schools and we make room for the 9th graders, the 8th, the 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th graders, all the way down to 5th grade. And that's where we expand out into the schools and we touch all these other children. And the schools love it because they get money, and it's more than $10, okay, an hour for a court, and they keep their concessions. So that whole relationship comes full circle because we're just a good partner, and we need them as much as they want to be a part of what we're doing.
Speaking of the employment, and you referenced that earlier in response to some other questions, but my notes, and tell me if I'm wrong, from the redevelopment commission meeting were that you anticipate 6 to 8 full-time employees and about 300 plus part-time employees.
That's accurate, yeah. And most of the part-time employees come from the third service help, court monitors, what we call floaters, and then the officiating. is a big, big number. I mean, if you can imagine how many referees it would take to handle 10 courts with 2 referees, so you've got 20 refs at one time, any given time in your facility, and you're rotating them out over a 12-hour period, you have to be pretty deep in your bench.
Not so much a question, but a comment. Again, as the processes move forward and we're continuing to have dialogue, counsel and yourself and your associates, any additional detail that you can provide us with regard to the relationship with the local school corporations? And I hate to be parochial, but since it's Mishawaka taxpayers and the city of Mishawaka involved here, I'm talking about School City of Mishawaka, our local parochial schools, and Penn Harris Madison schools. If you can continue to provide us additional information about your contacts with them and partnership opportunities with them, I'd appreciate
Well, that's our
that.
customer base, right?
Yep. So it's, again, our
And it
interests
doesn't
align
matter
along
if they're
those
in your
lines.
schools or they're homeschool, because we are the largest facility provider for homeschool athletes, and we hold the national, regional, and local tournaments for Indiana, as well as the handicap special needs kids. So this goes a way deeper. As we keep talking, I'm thinking of things. One other thing I'd like to comment on, we're also a state-of-play facility, so somebody asked, well, how is Mishawaka going to make sure that they benefit? We are a state-of-play, and we will get those hotel partners lined up, and you have to stay in the hotels in Mishawaka if you're going to play in our tournament. And believe me, I check, and I've thrown more than one team out of the tournament because they didn't stay where they were supposed to. Now, how do we do that? We monitor it. We have a third party called Site Search that helps us with that partnership. But also, we work with the local hotels to provide the lowest cost. So if somebody's coming in from Ohio and needs a hotel room and they want to stay at the Marriott product, you know, if our rate's $119 a night, they can't call and get that same rate from the hotel. In fact, it'll be $40 more. So that's some of the ways that we control this money from staying inside. Then we do a lot of couponing with the restaurants and the retail folks through court sponsorships and those types of relationships. I mean, imagine that you have, 6,000 to 7,000 people every hour and a half on the hour rotating in and out of your facility, and you're handing everyone a free Jimmy John sub or, go to Darla's clothing shop and get 10% off. Those are the ways that we really impact the community because, this facility seems like it's big, but when you're talking, close to 1 million visitors a year in an isolated space like that, it's marketing magic for your local community, business community.
So if all goes well and construction seasons line up and supplies are available, you talked a little bit at the Redevelopment Commission about the anticipated opening and when this facility would start to be used. Can you touch on that for a moment?
Well, weather has a big part of everything, especially up here. Believe it or not, you're really in another climate zone compared to Indianapolis, which
We know.
But we've been very blessed this year with weather down south, but assuming everything's normal, we account for weather, winter conditions. I want to get a shovel in the ground in February, and I would anticipate being open about a year later, maybe a little earlier. I have to be ready for the April travel business. So we have to be kinks out, rocking and rolling, by March of 2024.
Okay. So spring of 2024.
Latest.
Latest. Okay. Then last but not least, as we've talked about, this may not be the largest investment that we've ever made as a community, but it's unprecedented. And I would agree with you and the mayor and Mr. Prince and everybody else who's going to speak that this investment at that site really sets the stage for some surrounding development and can be the catalyst for some really positive outcomes for the community. But before we get to that, we have to decide whether to make the investment. And a lot of this rests upon you and your track record and your success and who you are and the collective feel for whether this is a good investment. So for the people who are watching online, the residents of Mishawaka, as well as for ourselves who sit on this dais, What else can you tell us that you haven't had a chance to share with us this point in time that will make us feel good about making this investment in you, your facility, and your vision?
Well, to keep it short, I've been told I'm unprecedented my whole life, right? So I'm a serial entrepreneur, and imagine me going before the Westfield Council 12 years ago with no track record, okay? So what I would say today is look at our record, look what we've done in these other communities, look what we're doing in future communities that we've already down the road with this development agreement. But I think our history speaks for ourselves, number one. Number two, I've got my own money. That's a significant amount that has already been invested. I've been financing lawyers and accountants and all kinds of things for 4 years. I got a significant amount of money. I'm already out here on the hairy edge with you, personally through the company. But I just think it's what we're going to be able to deliver based on our history. And everything I'm telling you tonight has happened somewhere else. I really don't know what else I can rely on. I got my integrity and I got my results. At the end of the day, I think everything else is BS. I don't think it means crap. So look at what we've done, and there is an element of trust here. There's no question about it, which is why I'm in the boat with you, with my own funds, my own time, and best answer I can give you.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you for your patience. Any other questions for Mr. Card? Mr. Mamalante?
Thank you again, Mr. President. Thank you again. Apologize for another series of questions, but as you speak and other colleagues have asked some questions, kind of spawned some for myself as well. And this may seem a silly question at the time, but I promise it does have relevance, at least in my mind. What is your preference, to build a facility like this or to purchase one that has been built comparable to Grant Park?
Well, I've looked at several other facilities, Nashville, Denver, Kansas City, and they're just not up to my standard, which I call the gold standard. It's very, very important that the infrastructure and the location of these facilities is the first thing you look at. And one of the reasons why we're here is because the ability of the city, Mayor Wood and his staff, to get this land with this infrastructure off of the tollway with that exit to get in and out. In any of my facilities, you can pull out of the parking lot and drive to California and not stop. So my preference, I really don't have a preference one way or the other than I can build them for less money today than I can go and refurbish one. They're just, most of the facilities that are around that even come close to what we want to do are tear downs. And I'll give you an example real quick. We're working very close with the Simons, who are the largest mall holders. And we have several pilot projects where they have a bankrupt Sears store or a Penny store or a Kmart. And I've looked really hard at coming in and trying to take a Sears store and turn it into an athletic facility. It's just cost prohibitive. So you got to tear it down. So I've had some looks in recent years of existing facilities. I just would encourage all of you to make a trip down to Indianapolis sometime and come in and see what you're going to have. Pictures do not do it justice. It'll blow you away, and I just got goosebumps, I'm telling you right now. And I don't know, there's nobody doing what we're doing. And again, I don't mean that in an arrogant manner. They just don't exist. You've got one in Dallas that's kind of okay, that Jermaine O'Neal opened up, an ex-Pacer. It's an operational disaster. And I think there's another one in Baltimore with the next NBA player. But beyond that, they're all pretty much gone to the wayside unless the city has stepped up and built a Grand Park type facility. One just opened up in Arizona that rivals Grand Park. But for the most part, there's really nothing out there to purchase. I'm not interested in turning a warehouse into this facility, and it's just because of the way we do things and the way they have to be built and efficiently run and move 1 million people plus through them every year.
And the reason I asked, as Mr. Hicksonball and Mr. Compton had mentioned, this is a serious and very large risk on the from the city's standpoint financially. So I guess my question, the reason I pose that question is if, in the unforeseen reason that you were to walk away or you didn't feel that it was profitable or go bankrupt, the worst case scenario, and here the city is holding basically the note of this large facility, would we be able to sell it to another developer or program?
It's a real risk. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's not. But again, one of the reasons why the development agreements are written the way they are is I have to be fair to, it has to be fair to me too. I don't want to walk away from it. And again, you know, I thought COVID was going to be scorched earth, but I'm going to tell you, it wasn't, and we were open 2 months later. In fact, it was the reverse. We lobbied to the health departments, and they let us open because we have these 60-foot high ceilings, and people were able to gather. Now, you could only have one parent per athlete, but we got open. And since COVID, and I don't see a stop to it, it's going just like this, because I think as Americans, we've realized what we don't take advantage of and what we do. And youth sports is a huge, huge thing. It's gone from a $35 billion to $49 billion a year industry post-COVID. And parents understand that they can take their children into these facilities. They're less likely to be on drugs. They're less likely to drink alcohol. They're less likely to hang around bad influencers. And that's just a fact. And I've got those metrics too. I mean, the juvenile center in Westfield used to have about an average of 100 kids in it. Since I've opened and Grant Park's open, it's 3. So again, I don't believe in coincidences. I don't take credit for everything. It may seem, you know, a little bit, but I don't believe in coincidences. I'm sorry. And I know what these facilities will do, and that's why I'm so picky about where I go. It's not about the number to open up. It's putting them in the right spot. And Mishawaka is the best metrics I've ever seen since I've been doing this. Well, other than Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Mr. President?
Mr. Evans.
Thank you. I got one question to clarify something. You had stated that it takes 10 to 12 months to build the facility here in Mishawaka. You also stated that you're booked solid for 2023. Where are you booked for 23? Booked solid for 23? Here?
No, in our other facilities.
Okay. All right. And I was just wondering if you're going to break ground in February, how you could be booked and supply the facility for 2023.
I didn't understand I couldn't quite hear what you said. I'm sorry.
No,
How am I
tried-
going to know that the facility here is going to be booked out solid?
No.
No?
I was just saying, I wrote down in my notes that you said that you could build a facility here in Mishawaka in between 10 and 12 months. And that you would like to break ground by February.
Yes.
And then also I had that you stated that you're booked for 2023 and 2024.
No, I'm booked, for 2023 in my other facilities.
Okay.
The minute you sign this development agreement, and I know that the funding's coming, I'm booking for 2024.
Okay, well, I didn't have that clarification.
And in my relationships with these big companies, I did it, and I've done it 4 times, and I'm going to do it a 5th time, and I'm going to do it multiple more times. So when Nike starts putting me on the calendar, which they have to do, or anybody else, they know Andy Card's going to be open come hell or high water. And that's why somebody asked me earlier, we don't get this done. Again, I don't see a path forward, because this has taken 4 years, and I know what's up ahead of me, and I got to go on down the road and work someplace else.
Well, there was just some kind of misunderstanding when you were talking about building, what it would take, and then also your book. It wasn't clarified that you were talking about someplace.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So we normally have the next year booked by August. So August of 2022, this year into September, we had all of our facilities for 2023 booked. And we had a record 600 teams per facility in our league, from 0.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Card? Before he sprints back to his seat and gives us a chance to ask any more. But thank you again for your
You're
patience
welcome.
with us.
Again, thank you all for having us, Mr. President and Council, Mayor Wood and Ken, staff, thank you.
Evidently, we have gone past the deadline for the local media to be able to make it back to their facilities, and
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No, this is fine.
Good evening. My name is Matt Eckerly. I'm a principal with Baker Tilly out of our Indianapolis office, though we do have an office that's about a 2-minute walk from here over on the river. I am here tonight in my capacity as the municipal advisor for the city of Mishawaka, and to talk a little bit about that role. We're assisting the city with the structure and execution of the financing that would fund this facility. I passed out to all of you 2 documents. The first is a detailed analysis of different financing structures. Happy to dive into those details as you see fit, but I also felt that this group probably does not like living in spreadsheets the way I do. So we also provided a presentation that is more of a high-level summary of those illustrations. Again, happy to dive into any of the details, but I'll live in the presentation for tonight to the extent that is necessary. So just starting off with a summary of the proposed financing plan, and forgive me for referring to my notes, but there's a lot of moving parts on this, so I want to make sure I get it right. The proposed bonds, we're looking at one series of taxable lease rental bonds, which means you'll be issuing them through a building corporation, which would own the payments on the facility. The city would make lease payments, and then the other revenue streams that I'll talk about in a moment. And then those lease payments will be utilized to service the debt that is issued to finance the facility. The final maturity of these bonds would be in August of 2046, and that aligns with the statutory expiration of the 1% innkeeper's tax revenues that are dedicated to this project. The anticipated sources of repayment for this facility financing are the aforementioned innkeeper's tax. 1% is dedicated per statute, as mentioned. The project tax increment revenues, or TIF revenues. The city is going to be establishing a site-specific tax increment allocation area for this facility, and the developer, Cardin Associates, is going to enter into a minimum taxpayer agreement with the city guaranteeing that TIF revenue stream, and I'll get into a little bit more on those mechanics here in a moment. And then the other main source of payment on these bonds would be the operating revenues of the company. So to the extent that the innkeeper's tax and the tax increment revenues are not sufficient to make the full payments on the bonds, the company would contribute operating revenues to fill that delta. Now, beyond that, what we typically do with structures like this is that when you're looking at a facility that is not yet in place or in operation, you don't have a revenue history to depend upon. The bond market looks for something more secure upon which it can base its credit decisions. So in this circumstance, we are looking at adding an ad valorem property tax, or a special benefits tax, through the redevelopment district. Purely for marketing purposes. We do not anticipate needing to draw upon that special benefits tax, but it's there in the event that those 3 primary sources of payment are not available to actually make the payments. That gives the market a feeling of additional security that they will receive those payments even if those other revenue sources fall short. Property taxes are viewed by the bond market, property taxes in Indiana, as the gold standard for Indiana municipal credits. Thus, using that is the mechanism we're looking at here. It's something you've done before here in Mishawaka with other financings. It's a standard practice for financings around the state of different types. And again, that would mean that if these revenues fall short, the city could make the policy decision to levy a property tax on all taxpayers to fill the gap. Now, there's also a legal finding that needs to be made in relation to the utilization of that property tax backup, that it's actually, in fact, a backup. And we call that the reasonable expectations test. And Randy Rumpola from Barnes and Thornburg, your bond counsel, can talk a little bit more about the legal justification behind that. But in short, it's making a finding that while you have that property tax backup in place, you have revenues with a history of revenues to depend upon, that you can make the finding that you reasonably expect that that property tax backup will never be drawn upon. And in this circumstance, those revenues that we're looking at to meet that reasonable expectations test include the city's consolidated tax increment allocation area that's currently in existence, and also other generally available revenues of the city. And that provides the city with the policy determination, should the unthinkable occur, of how to plug that gap, whether either with generally available revenues, tax increment, or the property tax levy on all taxpayers. Moving on, we are looking at 3 illustrative financing options for this facility, all of them set up to meet the estimated project costs of $38 million. Now, the main differences fall in the additional cash contributions, which I'll get into in a moment, and then also in how the debt service reserve is funded. And a debt service reserve fund is established at the outset as an additional layer of security for bondholders, that if the more dynamic revenue sources fall short, there is a dedicated fund held in escrow that is available to plug that gap until the other revenues can be brought to bear. Now, we're looking at a couple different ways of funding that reserve. It has not been fully determined as of yet. We anticipate applying for what we call a surety policy, which is you make an application to a bond insurance company where you pay a percentage of the total issuance amount, and that funds an insurance policy that meets the reserve requirement of the market. So you don't have to fully fund a cash available reserve up front. So that allows you to issue less debt, depend on less cash on hand. That's your first scenario. The other 2 scenarios assume a fully funded debt service reserve funded from cash and bond proceeds at the issuance of the debt. And that amount would be equal to the maximum annual or the maximum annual debt service payments on those bonds. Now, the other 3, or the other moving parts, we have $3.8 million of cash anticipated to be used at the outset of the project. That represents $1 million in innkeeper's tax on hand, plus the innkeeper's tax collected during the construction period. There's also illustrative additional cash contributions to fully fund the $38 million in conjunction with the bond issuance amounts, ranging from $4.1 million in scenario 1, $7.3 million in scenario 2, and $5.2 million in scenario 3. And that additional cash contribution, that represents your ready funding, and to the extent that ready is unavailable, it's being negotiated, the card would cover that delta. So those are the mechanisms in place there. The other variable that we've looked at is the annual payment amount. And again, later graphs will distill this a little more clearly, but you're looking at the annual company operating revenues required to fund the annual payments to the extent that tax increment and innkeeper's taxes aren't enough to make the payments. Scenarios 1 and 2, we're looking at average operating revenue contributions of $2,090,000 a year. Scenario 3, we're looking at $2.36 million a year in company operating revenues being contributed to pay the bonds. Overall, $37 million in bonds for the first 2 scenarios, 39.9, almost $40 million in scenario 3 to fully fund that $38 million project. Now, the next slide illustrates the comparison of your estimated revenues, and these are the primary revenue sources to the illustrative lease rental payments. Scenarios 1 and 2 have the same bond sizing, so we are basing those 2 scenarios on the same bond sizing. You're looking at $960,000 a year in assumed innkeeper's tax contribution. That represents your innkeeper's tax level of that 1% in 2019, which was the last year pre-COVID. We've included in the detail a historical chart of innkeeper's tax revenues if you would like to look at how that's performed over the years and understand where that's at now. We are estimating the minimum TIF payment amount to be $357,790 a year. That is based solely on the Phase 1 project that Mr. Card outlined. We developed that assumption based on the assumed build-out and then looking at the assessments for comparable facilities in Indiana. Obviously, Mr. Card was talking about the gold standard. We looked at some of his facilities as the standard for that assessed value assumption. And then that's using the City of Mishawaka tax rate for that taxing district. We've assumed both of those will hold constant conservatively for the term of this financing. Obviously, to the extent that either of those revenue streams overperforms what this conservative estimate represents, that would mean that much less revenue, operating revenues, would be contributed by CARD to make the debt payments on an annual basis. The next slide illustrates the reasonable expectations test. So assuming that those revenues aren't available, what are the other resources that are available to the City of Mishawaka? The consolidated TIF is the purple area, and that is in operation currently, generating just south of $18 million. It does begin to peel off in 2027, and then it fully expires in 2040 following the final maturity of your 2015 bonds. And the reason for that is the vagaries of Indiana law that allow for different expiration dates for different establishment and expansion dates for the individual components of the allocation area. Again, happy to dive into details on that if you so desire, either tonight or at another time. We do account for your outstanding TIF-based debt revenue or debt obligations. You have 3 of them. The 2015 bonds mature in 2040. The 2017 bonds mature in February of 23, and then the 2021 bonds that you issued last year, those mature in 2033. And then following the expiration of the complete consolidated allocation area, you're looking at the general revenue pledge being the ultimate backing for the bonds. For, again, the reasonable expectation test that Randy can get into in a little more detail momentarily. The next 2 slides are the same slides, but for scenario 3, which is the larger bond issue. Just to hit a little bit on the details there, same assumptions for innkeeper's tax and TIF payments. In that scenario, you're looking at $2.36 million in annual operating revenue contribution. The total lease rental amount on an annual basis is $3.68 million on average. And then this next slide is, again, the reasonable expectations test. One thing I do want to note, we've been working throughout this process with Baird, which is an underwriting firm based in Chicago. They're going to be placing this debt, and they've been providing feedback on structures and on interest rate assumptions. And one of the questions that everyone asks these days when I'm presenting information on bonds is, okay, we've been seeing the Fed making a lot of options. How is that accounted for in these numbers? And there is cushion built into these. If you sold these bonds today, you would have a lower rate than what we've been assuming in these illustrative structures. Obviously hoping for the best on that front, but these structures represent today's market with cushion built on top of it. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that this group might have.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Mr. Compton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Eckerly, thank you very much for the presentation. I do have a couple of questions. One is you made a statement, I believe, that said we have done this type of financing before. That was my question to Mayor and Mr. Prince. Could you give us the examples of where we have done this?
Well, I should say I'm using in general the royal we, but here in Mishawaka itself, you've used a property tax backup for you called them the stimulus bonds last year to back the consolidated TIF revenues. I don't believe we had a property tax backup on the 2015 or the 2017 bonds for the Mill at Ironworks project. But again, more generally speaking, this structure has been used around Indiana to fund public-private partnerships such as this. Happy to provide more specific examples.
No, I was curious about what we have done,
Sorry.
and how we have done that.
I should have been more clear.
You made that statement, so that caught my ear. The other thing that caught my attention was, did I hear you say that, going to page 3, the illustrative average company operating revenues, the money that, that would be paid to service the debt from Card & Associates, from the operation of the facility, that's the max amount that they would be paying, that if there's, the other revenues were higher than expected, then that would be a lower amount. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that represents, just based on these assumptions, what we're estimating that they will be paying on an annual basis. If the innkeeper's tax revenues and TIF revenues go up, they wouldn't be required to contribute as much because, the debt would be covered more by those other sources. Conversely, if those revenues went down, then CARD would be looked upon to contribute more to fill that gap between the TIF revenues and the innkeeper's tax revenues and the debt service due.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Other questions? Mrs. Volker?
I need bond 101. What's the difference between a surety bond and the other kinds of bonds that you're talking about?
Sure. The surety bond is, the best way to think about it is almost an insurance policy. It's called a surety bond. It's a term of the industry. It's not a bond in the sense of the city of Mishawaka is looking to go out and issue bonds to fund a project. It's more of a bond that's held that if a draw on that reserve is required, someone is backing that bond, which would be the insurance company, to plug that gap. You're going to pay them a premium so that they would meet that reserve obligation in the event that it's needed. So it's confusing because you've got this kind of bond, and then you've got the surety bond. You might have performance bonds on a construction contract. They're all different types of bonds, but they're not necessarily the same as one another. Does that answer your question? Or?
Well, I guess what I want to know is how are you deciding between scenario 1, 2, 3? How are we deciding?
Sure. So the difference is we're going to make applications to insurance providers to see if they will qualify this bond issue for a surety policy to fund the reserve. And if any of the insurers make the determination, yes, we're willing to grant this policy, and they have done this for other card facilities, then we would go with that option because that's going to be the lowest.
So these are our
overall
priorities.
cost.
Number 1 is the first priority,
Yeah.
or the best scenario. Number
Yeah.
2 would be second. Number 3 would be
I think that's a good one. We didn't intentionally rank them, but I would say that that's what we're aiming for, scenario 1 to be the end product.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Compton?
Thank you. I have one more question. You're the group that does the financial model to see if this is feasible and how we can do this. Has you or your firm looked at the 3 operating facilities, their balance sheets? Are they viable? Has anyone looked at that?
So the city did ask us to take a look at the existing facilities and at the pro forma information provided by CARD. We provided a preliminary review of all of the underlying assumptions. We weren't engaged to audit those underlying facilities or really dig into the details, and I would have to defer to CARD's team to talk in more granular detail on how those facilities have operated and how those assumptions translate to the Mishawaka facility. What I can tell you is that we have provided a summary of all of those key assumptions, and we did not opine on how viable it might be or anything from the pure financial perspective, but what they did do in their pro forma modeling was used their, and Billy, please hop in if I misrepresent, their revenue and expenditure data on a per square foot basis for the operations of the existing facilities and extrapolated that to the Mishawaka facility. And they did provide that backing information. I can't share that with you because it's confidential, but I'm sure if that's something that you request from CARD, they might be willing to provide to you. But we did take a look at that and saw those linkages and how they developed those assumptions to feed into the overall modeling.
Very good. And I wouldn't ask them to provide to me. I could look at it, somewhat understand it, but that's why I'm asking you, as the group that does this for a living.
Sure.
Have you really dug into and looked at what they have? And thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Other questions? Mr. Mamalani?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for your detailed presentation. For some of the folks that are listening online, and I've been asked a couple questions, and you may not be the best person to answer this, but you're standing at the podium, so. So we're creating a site-specific TIF. So, as I understand it, the money's generated will remain in the TIF. So as the folks that are listening here online and constituents that are asking the question, so what does, if it stays in the TIF, what does it do for me as a resident on West 8th Street?
If the revenues are staying within the TIF area. So the concept that's in play here with the TIF being used is that without the TIF, this project can't happen. So if you don't establish this new TIF area, the new development won't occur, and all the follow-on effects that Mr. Card outlined won't occur. By using the TIF, while you're keeping those tax revenues, those property tax revenues within that geography, you're really making the determination that, really we're not creating the TIF to get more property tax dollars out of this in the short run. You'll get the growth in assessed value when the TIF goes away. You are looking for the follow-on impacts outside of the property taxes as being the benefit beyond the project itself.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you again for the information. Just a couple follow-ups. I want to go back to the question that Mr. Compton asked you about Mishawaka precedent for that pledge of property tax revenue. And although it's understandable to me that you turn and refer to Mr. Prince, who is a great resource, for our purposes and for the purposes of people who are listening at home, your answer was not overly audible. So can you talk a little bit further about, that's okay, but
Sure.
Could you repeat that then?
Sure. So you utilize the property tax backup as an additional source of security for the bonds that were issued last year, the stimulus bonds from the TIF revenues of the consolidated allocation area. So that's the ultimate backstop for those bonds, and it was used, again, purely for marketing purposes. Generally speaking, property taxes will get a more advantageous rating from ratings agencies and more competitive rates in the market.
And again, if I understood you correctly, this is a widely recognized financing vehicle throughout the state of Indiana that multiple governmental entities have engaged in over the course of time.
That is correct, for a variety of projects, from purely public projects to public-private partnerships.
Okay. And then going back to Mrs. Volker's question about the three scenarios, I understand the differential that's embedded in scenario number one with regard to the possible surety bond. With regard to what will drive the outcome with respect to scenario 2 and 3, I want to make sure that I understand you correctly. That will be the amount of ready funding, additional ready funding that would potentially be obtained, or am I missing the boat on it?
It would be a combination of ready funding and additional cash up front from another source, which could include Mr. Card himself.
Okay.
So that's the differential there. Scenarios 1 and 2, you kind of have the limit of $2,090,000 of company payments in addition to the other differentiating factors. Scenario 3 looks at, okay, what if you just issued a bigger bond and kept the additional cash into the project at the $5.2 million ready contribution amount?
So the combination of ready and other financing that hasn't been identified at this point in time bridges that gap to determine whether we go with scenario 2 or 3 if this moves forward.
That would be, yes.
Okay. As part of your representation of the city and your consultation with the administration, do you opine with regard to risk and make a recommendation with regard to the relative risk to the community of the financing, or is it your role simply to lay out the alternatives and then answer questions?
It's mainly the latter. We don't make any opinions on the risk of particular projects.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions?
Okay.
Mr. Hazen?
So we don't know the rate on the bond yet, right?
We do not yet.
So when we get that rate, do we just pass that on to Cardin Associates? Do we add to it? Do we?
It's, the rate is the rate. You sell the bonds and the structure, that's going to be locked in. We're not looking at variable rates or anything like that. It'll be fixed and then that financing and the payments will be set at that time and be known. And then the only variable is going to be the innkeepers and TIF revenues determining how much money the card developer contribution amounts to.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, the luxury of batting cleanup is Mr. Eckerly has hopefully answered a lot of your questions, and I will speak specifically to the two resolutions, and I may overlap a little bit of what Matt said.
Counselor, although it's a technicality, could you identify yourself?
Oh,
for the record,
absolutely.
please?
Sorry, yes. Randy Rompola, serving as bond counsel for the transaction, partner with the law firm of Barnes & Thornburg with offices in South Bend. The first resolution is approving the form of the development agreement itself, and there's been much discussion about the financing structure of the project itself. What I would focus on specifically that hasn't been focused on, there is the obligation of the developer to provide a mortgage and a note with respect to the project itself, so that the developer essentially would guarantee that site-specific TIF revenue, the project TIF, if you will, and also the operating revenue payment. And to the extent that I keep saying the developer, Cardin Associates, the company, to the extent those payments were not made during the course of the financing, the city would hold the note and the mortgage and could foreclose on the property at that point. And that would put the city in the position of being able to find another operator for the facility. As I've heard Mr. Prince say, the city isn't desiring to operate the facility, but they want to find somebody qualified in that event were to happen. And as Mr. Card indicated, he would never allow that to happen. But that is also in the development agreement. So that's the form, the resolution approving the form of the development agreement. And again, it provides for the construction of the project, the financing that has been dealt with, and I'll speak to the financing as I talk about the lease as well, but I just want to cover that resolution. The second resolution approves the form of lease between the Redevelopment Commission and the Building Corporation. That is the essence of the financing that secures the bonds that would be issued. The Redevelopment Commission would enter into the lease with the Building Corporation. The leased property would be certain roads within the city. The lease would be payable from, and again, this has been covered, but I think it's important, would be payable from the project TIF, the site-specific TIF, the operating revenue, and the hotel motel tax, the innkeeper's tax. And as Mr. Eckerly mentioned, the innkeeper's tax, for purposes of the financing structuring, they are using the 2019 number, which is approximately $960,000. The 1% is the 1%. So yes, it's $960,000, and that's the conservative approach to show no growth. But as that grows, that would also, all of that would be the 1% that would be payable to this lease financing. The special benefits tax, as Mr. Eckerly indicated, is the ultimate security that would allow the bonds to be issued at a lower interest rate. I liken that going to a bank and getting a mortgage, and if you have a father or an uncle that is wealthy and can co-sign that mortgage, you get a better interest rate. In this sense, it's the tax backup, if you will, the special benefits tax backup that would provide the best interest rate. And it is a financing mechanism that is widely used in Indiana, as Mr. Eckerly indicated, for any number of projects. To use the special benefits tax, there's two things that have to be thought about. One, you have to be making these determinations now before the bonds are issued. So it is the tool by which the bonds are in fact sold. We're contemplating, assuming the council were to act this evening, and the Redevelopment Commission and the other bodies that need to meet and approve, including yourselves, to consider the bond ordinance at a future meeting. If all of that happened on the calendar we had prepared, we would anticipate bonds being sold in January. To allow the bonds to be sold in January to get to that low interest or lower interest rate with the special tax backup, that has to be part of the approval process now. So we're trying to put into place the ability to show the bond market that there is a mechanism there for security to make the conservative bond market feel comfortable about buying these bonds at that particular interest rate. Unfortunately, the rate's not as low as it was 6 months ago, but it still would be low comparatively to other types of bond products in the market. The second thing we need to do now, since 2008, is to satisfy the reasonable expectations test, and that is to affirmatively show that we do not expect to need the special benefits tax, that we have other trusted sources of revenue, if you will, to be able to issue these bonds with the tax backup in place, but knowing we shouldn't have to use it. When you look at the sources to pay the lease rental, the project TIF, the operating revenues, and the hotel motel tax, only one of them at this point, with all due respect to Carr and Associates, is known. It's the hotel motel tax. And that presently, based on the conservative approach, isn't sufficient to pay the entirety of the debt. So we have to look at other known sources of funding to be able to say that we can pass the reasonable expectations test. And so in this case, we would look at the consolidated TIF, which again, there's history there. The TIF has been collected, it's been available, and you can predict relatively securely that it would be there going forward. Unfortunately, that does, at various points, terminate as the TIF areas terminate. And so for the latter part of the debt, we talk about the generally available city revenues. And again, no expectation to need those revenues, but for now, looking at what would be able to pass the reasonable expectations test, which is a fairly conservative test, it's knowing trusted sources of revenues that are in place and would be available. So while we are trying to accomplish two things, we're trying to tell the market that we want to sell these bonds with the absolute, as Mr. Eckerly indicated, the gold standard with respect to Indiana bond debt, to have the tax backup in place, but we're also trying to satisfy the state law requirement, which is most concerning to the local taxpayers, knowing that there would be sufficient revenues available to not need that tax levy. And so in the second resolution relating to the lease, in addition to recognizing the use of all of these revenues to pay the lease rental, you're also recognizing that in the absolute worst case scenario, at some point in the future, it may be necessary to look at those available tax revenues to the extent the project TIF or the operating revenues weren't available as predicted, or the innkeeper's tax doesn't grow beyond the conservative $960,000, as if the hotel rates and usage never increased beyond 2019. So in that resolution, there's language that speaks to the ability of the Redevelopment Commission, I think it's in the second paragraph, for the ability of the Redevelopment Commission to look at those revenues to be able to make that reasonable expectations test. It also does say, though, that it would be subject to appropriation. So the council would always control the ability, a future council would always control the ability to appropriate those funds or not appropriate those funds. But all you're allowing the Redevelopment Commission today is to take those into account in determining whether or not it's reasonable to expect that the tax levy wouldn't be necessary. I think I spoke about the calendar, the two resolutions. Yeah, I don't think I have much else to say. I could repeat much of what Mr. Eckerly said about the structure, but I won't in the interest of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Rampolla? Mr. Compton.
Mr. Rampolla, thank you very much. Appreciate it, like all the others. I asked earlier about adding a local labor component to the development agreement. And in your opinion, if we were to have such a thing, is this the place to, I mean, as I look at it, it looks like to me that would be the place that it would address that. I'm not asking whether you think it is, I'm just asking if this is where it would be.
If it were to be anywhere, I suppose it would be in the development agreement. I guess I would consider whether or not, from a project standpoint, when we look at drafting development agreements and crafting language and not putting language in, frequently that type of, I would say two things. One, to have an absolute percentage to hit. I don't really ever see that because it's difficult. And I think Mr. Card alluded to some of the reasons why that's difficult. Sometimes you see language to say to use best efforts to use local contractors. I don't know that actually reducing that to words in the agreement provides any greater safety or protection in terms of being able to accomplish that, because best efforts is always beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and so what are best efforts? Given today's labor market, I think as we look at development agreements, you see that type of language, it would be hard to challenge that, because there's labor, and I don't pretend to know the current labor market, but it's very difficult to know whether or not contractors have the ability to produce the labor currently to get jobs done timely. So frequently in development agreements that we're doing sort of in the current environment, we're not including that language. If you hear, as Mr. Card did here, make, the representations that their intent is to do that, that's probably as good as having it in the document, because I think having something in the document would be particularly hard in today's environment to enforce.
Thank you, I appreciate those comments.
Thank you. Other questions from Mr. Rampolla? Counselor, I've got a couple for you. And I'm going to, since you've referenced both resolutions and both agreements in the interest of everybody's time, I'm going to wander into the second one. But first things first, with regard to the economic development agreement. And I'm focusing first on section 3.01G, which makes reference to some event reporting and some reporting obligations on the part of CARD to various entities, including the city, after January 1 of 2025. My reading of this agreement and the way that the city is defined therein would be that the council is encapsulated within that definition, so that any of that reporting after the facility is constructed and there is an update with regard to ongoing activity, that we as a council would have access to that as well. Am I reading it correctly?
I would read it that way, yes.
Okay.
The city. And I would mention that language specifically relates to the use of the hotel motel tax, so that the idea is that this facility would be bringing visitors to the community, not only the hotel and motel, but also the restaurants and the shops.
So it's a potential way for us to be able to make sure that what we hope will be the utilization and the economic impact throughout St. Joe County and Mishawaka, that we'll have a way to be able to confirm that that expectation is being met.
Right.
Then I want to jump down to section 4.02F. And as I read that section, even if this agreement is approved this evening, there are a couple conditions subsequent that could take place that would vitiate the agreement. The non-issuance of the bonds, is that correct?
Right.
Remonstrance by the requisite number of taxpayers, or the inability to be able to sell the bonds on the open market.
Right. No, that is correct. As part of the approval process, and we're sort of in the middle of it, the Redevelopment Commission took initial action to approve the form of the lease. They have a meeting and a public hearing next week, and that'll produce more notices. You obviously have the opportunity to consider adoption of the bond ordinance. So there are periods in the process, in the approval process, that we could go off track at any point.
So stated differently, that ordinance that was referenced earlier in the agenda as being on first reading, that is geared toward approval at our second council meeting in November, that touches on the issuance of the bonds, that's a separate and distinct action on the part of the council, and we are not bound by virtue of any action we would take this evening irretrievably in order to approve the development agreement.
Right. Ultimately, the bonds do have to be issued. And that lease, and I'm not sure I made the connection or the connection's been made, but the lease rentals that the Redevelopment Commission would pay from the sources of revenue, that lease rental serves the basis for the payment of the bonds. I think we've all said it indirectly, but so the bonds that would be issued, the economic development revenue bonds by the city, those bonds would be paid from the lease rentals that the Redevelopment Commission would pay to the building corporation, and the building corporation would pay those to the bond trustee.
Understood. There have been multiple references this evening to that single site allocation area, and section 4.03, I'm sorry, of the agreement touches on that. Is it an accurate reading of the document that the approval of this development agreement does not in and of itself create that single site allocation area? There is subsequent action that needs to take place, and if I'm correct on that, can you summarize what such
Sure.
action needs to be?
Sure. So the redevelopment commission at its meeting last week took the initial action to approve the amending declaratory resolution to designate that separate site. That also needs to go through the city plan commission. It would come back before you, the council, for approval, and then it would go back before the redevelopment commission for a confirming resolution and a public hearing. So that's, again, part of the schedule that I spoke to.
Okay. Then jumping down to the second resolution that has implications for the building corporation and the lease. In reading that resolution, there is a reference to up to $45 million that's embedded in that resolution, although, as we just heard from Mr. Eckerly and has been touched on tonight, you know, the numbers in the financial analysis are less than that, in the neighborhood of $39 million. And we've touched on that before, but for the record, can you explain why that number is embedded in the resolution?
Sure. So there are 3 numbers in the resolution that are all maximum not to exceeds. And the reason for the maximum not to exceeds are that by the time we get to the actual bond issuance, rates may change ever so slightly, the numbers in the financing may change slightly. If we used exactly scenario 1 or exactly scenario 2 and the numbers were off by $1, we'd have to repeat the entirety of the process. And so the 3 numbers that are in section 1 of that resolution, one is the lease rental not to exceed $5 million. I think it's fair to say, and people behind me could agree, that if we were at a $5 million annual lease rental, this project wouldn't be doable. But we've picked a maximum not to exceed. We've picked a maximum not to exceed interest rate of 8.5%. Again, Matt, I think it would probably not, again, be doable at that based on current numbers where we're at, but again, we pick a maximum not to exceed. And as well, the maximum term of the lease, 25 years, I think that's fair to say we probably will have a 25-year lease. We're contemplating a bond issue that would take the entirety of the lease term. But the lease rental and the maximum interest rate, and I think the reference to the bond principal amount, the $45 million, obviously, again, is a not to exceed. But the reason we do that, again, is because this approval process, starting last week at the end of October, running through the end of December, if we were to use exactly what we think scenario 1 would be and we're off by $1, we'd have to repeat the entire process. So we give ourselves the flexibility not to have to do that.
And just to reiterate the point that you made earlier, you know, with regard to that pledge of local property tax revenues as the final, you know, I think of it as in case of emergency, break the glass option with regard to servicing the debt. There would be subsequent action that would have to be taken by the fiscal body, that is the city council, in order to determine how much, if any, and from which source of revenue for the city would be used to service that debt.
Exactly. All we're trying to do with respect to passing the reasonable expectation test is look at what I would refer to as trusted revenue, known revenue. And again, the sources of known revenue in this transaction are the hotel motel tax, because there's a history there, the consolidated TIF revenue because of the history, and then the generally available city revenues because of your budget. You carry a budget, and so you have that. The project revenues and the project TIF wouldn't count under the reasonable expectations test, because for a project coming out of the ground, we can't say that they're known revenue. I'm not suggesting they won't be there, but we just can't count on them to surpass that reasonable expectations test.
And when we talk about the reasonable expectations test, which is undoubtedly a statutory term of art, again, it is not that we expect that we're going to have to do that. That's just the term of art. And at this point in time, if I've understood you and others correctly, it is not anticipated that any general fund revenues would be necessary in order to service this.
Right. And just to use the words, the reasonable expectations test is that you, in allowing the special benefits tax to provide the security, you reasonably expect not to have to use the special benefits tax. So it's the reasonable expectation of not needing the tax because you have these other sources of revenue that you expect to have to be able to pay the debt service without resorting to the tax. So, correct.
And is the ability to obtain more preferential financing terms a benefit only to CARD, or does the city as well stand to benefit if there's a better rate that we're able to obtain on the bonds?
In this case, if the interest rate were, if the special benefits tax were not there, I suspect, and Mr. Eckerly could comment, I suspect the project might not be doable because you wouldn't be able to achieve an interest rate that would be reasonable. In certain circumstances, the benefit is that the term of the bond is shorter because, again, that would be one way to deal with a higher interest rate, would just be to amortize the debt over a longer period, to have smaller principal payments. And now I'm delving into the municipal advisory area, but and you can correct me, but to have smaller principal payments to deal with the higher interest. And so by having the special benefits tax, you're paying the bond off earlier probably than you otherwise could, if you could even do it.
So the favorable financing terms are a benefit to the city, number one, to allow this project to move forward, and number two, am I wrong to think that that allows us to cushion ourselves against, having to really dedicate other resources to the servicing of the debt? It's just it's a win for the city all around if we're going to move forward for us to obtain the best financing.
By issuing debt at a lower interest rate, correct, the annual payments are lower than they otherwise would be, and within that time frame. Having a bond issue that matures in 2046 at a lower interest rate would have lower payments versus one with a higher interest rate. And as I said, my suspicion is that from a math standpoint, you probably couldn't issue these bonds without the tax backup because you'd be issuing at a higher rate. I also think it's fair to say we wouldn't be able to get the surety bond for the reserve fund. And that would be the other benefit, because the benefit of the, and I like to call it a debt service reserve insurance policy. That's what they used to be called 15 years ago, but now they call them surety bonds. But the debt service reserve fund insurance policy, so we're not using the bond term, you wouldn't be able to get that from an insurance company without that special benefits tax backup. And so, again, the financing would be much more costly or not doable.
And then last but not least, since you're back in cleanup, and I forgot to ask this question to Mr. Eckerly, and if you end up deferring to him, that's okay. But with regard to the hotel motel tax projections that are built into the financing and the projections that are made here, what I understood from the redevelopment commission meeting is that, as they should be, these are conservative estimates. But even what's built into these estimates is not allowing for growth in that tax, which could accrue to the benefit of the city and to CARD and to the viability of this project as we move forward. Is that all accurate?
Right. And I have to admit, so we had the hotel motel tax board meeting on Friday, and I've been so fixated at the 960, which is the conservative 2019 number. Someone on the hotel motel tax board made the suggestion that, well, what if the tax revenues are, millions of dollars in 20 years? And I'm sure Mr. Jarnicki would be very happy about that. And it was hard to wrap my head around because we have been focused on the 960 as the conservative approach. But to the extent the hotel motel tax revenues do grow, as Mr. Eckerly indicated, those revenues are pledged to this project, and so it would cover more and more of the lease rental payment that would be necessary to service the debt, reducing the need for the increment and reducing the need for the operating revenues. If the increment is not needed for this project, it could be used by the redevelopment commission for other related projects. As development occurs around that area, that increment could be freed up, again, to the extent the hotel motel tax does grow to that extent.
All right. That's all been very helpful. Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions for Mr. Rampolla? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If you would, please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward.
Thank you, Council. My name is Scott Callentine, 315 North Lafayette Boulevard, South Bend, Indiana. I'm not necessarily opposed to this project. I think it's a great thing for this community. Like Mr. Compton, I am concerned about local labor. I happen to be a representative with labor in the community, and I've seen out-of-town contractors come in many times, bring questionable subcontractors with. I think it's important to this community that our local workers have a shot at doing this work. They're going to reinvest the money in this community. We've also seen concerns with tax fraud with some of these subcontractors that come into the area. So that's my only concern in this project. I think is a great thing for the city, great possibility for the youth of this area, but I would like to see some conscious effort to try to use local labor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Callentine, Mr. Benicki?
Thank you. The question that I would have for you, being that you're with the local carpenters union, do you have enough people that would be able to fill the type of jobs they're looking for to build this in a timely fashion?
I think so. I mean, this project here was a $20 million project that was done with local labor. We're at the Iron Works right now, local labor doing that project. We are at Notre Dame constantly with local labor. We're maintaining right now. All the trades obviously would like to see larger numbers, but we're manning the jobs in this community right now. So.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Then to follow up on your comments, thank you for, I do have a question though. So beyond Mr. Compton's suggestion of embedding something, some language provision in the agreement and taking into account Mr. Rampola's comments earlier that you heard, is there anything beyond that that would address your concern and make you feel better about the opportunity for local labor to have a seat at the table and a chance to be able to be part of this project?
I know there's no guarantee of what you put into language. I've heard things like metrics and the way they watch the operating costs and stuff spoke about this evening. Labor is the only place you can cut corners in this industry. The materials all cost the same, so it comes down to labor. Mr. Compton's seen it, I've seen it. You know, people come in town and do these projects. They many times already have a contractor that they work with, questionable employees, or taxes being paid on some of those employees, workman's comp, things like that. You know, part of my organization, we cover 20 counties in northeast Indiana. We've had trouble with Amazon projects in Fort Wayne, where over 50 workers didn't get paid, and weren't getting paid overtime. Our organization stepped up with our attorneys, got those people paid. So. People, when they travel around and do these different projects, usually they have a set group of contractors that use, like Meyer and Agent. So they might already have an idea what they're going to pay in labor costs or questionable people for their subcontractors. And usually that's where we see it in our industry is the second tier, the third tier subcontractors, you know. We have people that are labor traffickers. You know, that's a new big thing now. Tax fraud is a big issue in the state. There's a lot of money lost in tax revenue for questionable people doing these projects. That's my only concern, you know, using the local workforce. We have that problem here locally. I mean, I can walk you across the street and show you these issues that are happening right here. That's my only concern. Like I said, I think this is a great project for the youth in this community. Some sort of reassurance that we try to use local labor, though, is going to give you more control over this project. And it's going to give return back in the community if local people are making these wages, doing these jobs.
Agreed. I think this council and Mishawaka as a city has long had not just a preference, but a strong preference for union labor to be involved in any of the projects that we're involved in. So I would agree with you on that. Have you had an opportunity to have any direct interaction with Carden Associates prior to today?
No, I just had a brief phone call to him. Sometimes in my line of work, we reach out to developers, contractors, try to let them know about the local workforce. They did state that they use Meyer Najum, so I imagine they're going to be their construction manager, and Meyer Najum will probably take part in picking the subcontractors and stuff.
Okay. And maybe that process needs to play out, but would you see any value in this council asking Mr. Card to meet with you or a representative of Card and Associates to meet with you in order to discuss these type of issues?
I think it's a good thing, you know, and they could do a pre-job with the building trades. You know, the building trades gets together twice a month. You know, I'm sure all the trades, the operators, the electricians, the carpenters, masons, anybody involved with the project would love to have a pre-job discussion with them.
So it sounds like rather than just a one-off conversation, some ongoing dialogue between the developer and the trades would be you'd see some benefit in that.
Yeah, I mean, that would give them a perspective on what local labor is available and where we're at with projects in the area. And I'm not necessarily just pushing that it's all union. I think it's, you know, there's room to support local workers here. That's the biggest concern.
What I've always been told, going back to the days that I sat next to Jim Benjamin on this council, was that the unions don't want to guarantee, they just want a fair shot at the work. Is that
That's
accurate?
correct. I want our contractors to have opportunity to bid the work.
Okay.
I want, you know,
Thank you.
a seat at the table, basically.
Seat at the table. Very well said. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? If you would, please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? Hearing no one, are there any council members who wish to speak? Mr. Compton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since we've had the redevelopment commission meeting and up to today, and you know, as I do, I think a lot about these things and try to think how they fit. And while this isn't a large, you know, it's $38 million. But it's not a large construction project. We are backing it with the tax dollars and TIF dollars of citizens of Mishawaka. I hope and don't think that will likely never be used, but it is backed with that. So I have to, and I think we have to take this very, very seriously. I appreciate the comments that I've heard tonight. Mr. Card, I pushed you pretty hard, but for the reasons that I just stated. And I'm passionate about my community and what we do. I think your facility would be a great thing for us and continued development on the north end of town. I think for me, after listening to all this, that Mr. Rampolla probably said it best for me, that having you state on the floor of this meeting that you will make every effort to use local contractors and local labor for subcontractors. Frankly, that's probably the best we can ask for in this environment or at this time. So that said, I'm going to support these two resolutions and move on to the next step at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Mr. Card, can I prevail on your good graces for just a couple more minutes? Just when you thought you were out of it, we drug you back? Yeah, sorry about that. Just as a follow-up, not necessarily you, because I don't want to impose upon your busy calendar, but is there somebody from your firm, one of your associates perhaps, that you can put in touch with Mr. Callentine and some other representatives of our local trades to start that discussion and that dialogue about how they might have the ability to have a seat at the table as part of your project?
I will personally meet with them myself and any representatives, and I will ensure that they have every fair shot that everybody else does. I will personally see to it myself.
I appreciate that. So if you can touch base with Mr. Callentine after the meeting and give him your contact information, I'm sure he'd appreciate that, and we'd appreciate that as well. Any other questions for Mr. Card before he gets to sit back down once more? Thank you, sir. Any other questions or comments from the council? I appreciate Mr. Compton's comments, and I agree with him. This is not the largest investment that we've ever made as a community, but it's an important investment, and it sets the stage for even bigger and better things to happen in the northwestern or northeastern part of Mishawaka, where we've made some significant investment, as was referenced by Mr. Prince, with regard to infrastructure and what have you. So I look forward to hearing some more about some of the items that we touched on this evening in the dialogue with Card and Associates. You know, firming up perhaps how the relationship with the school corporations will work and some additional detail on that. Firming up how Mishawaka residents and their children will have the opportunity to participate as part of those nonprofits and what have you. So I look forward to hearing that information as we move toward the next stage of this process and the approval of the bonds. But I agree with Mr. Compton. This is a project worthy of support, and I will be voting in favor of this evening as well. And with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I will call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Beninki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Resolution R 2022-34, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, approving a lease between the City of Mishawaka Building Corporation and the City of Mishawaka Redevelopment Commission related to the athletic facility project and taking other actions related thereto.
Thank you. We'll now open the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-34. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward, and the record will reflect that any of the speakers who submitted information with regard to the prior resolution, given the overlap of issues here, their comments will be incorporated by reference if they really want to cut to the chase.
We're done.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If you would, please come forward. Is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone here with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? If not, then I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Beninki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Resolution passes 9-0.
Before we move into ordinances on second reading, the suggestion has been made that this may be an opportune time for a break. So, hearing without any objection, we will adjourn for 10 minutes, and which means that we are going to be back on the record at 10:08 sharp.
Excellent.
We'll stand adjourned for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Is he?
Yeah, work
Which one? Yeah, just 10 wait now. Yep.
Oh. This is my dinner.
Everybody has returned, sir.
All right. Then we will resume our proceedings with ordinances on second reading. Madam Clerk.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-37, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, as from time to time amended, commonly known as the zoning ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is rezoned from C1 to S2 planned unit development to an all-mixed-use commercial and residential development northeast corner of North Main Street and East University Drive.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President, to the members of the Common Council, the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Land Use Planning, to whom I referred the matter of proposed ordinance number 2022-37, report that they have examined said matter, and that in their opinion, it should be presented to the council as a whole. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for acceptance.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll now open second reading and public hearing on proposed ordinance 2022-37. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward.
Steve Ruby, Admarsh Consulting, 315 West Jefferson Boulevard, South Bend, Indiana, representing the developer. As stated here, this is, we're seeking to pursue a PUD approach to this project, this allowing multiple uses on the site. The site, as designed currently, would feature a auto car wash facility, as well as drive-through restaurants, potentially residential uses, other mixed-use commercial elements within this space. We've worked with the city and Ken Prince and their staff over the past 3-4 months here to develop some standards for that, which have been worked through and agreed upon between the owner and the city, as well as we've looked at access to the site in its whole. We are still pursuing some other potential access to the site through a neighboring property that's ongoing, but unfortunately, at this point in time, it is not available, but we are still pursuing those types of options for better ingress, egress to the site. But we are seeking your approval and I guess for the development to move on. Mr. Pericini will also be speaking here shortly. He is online, I believe, but he will be filling in some of the history as well on the site. So with that, are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Ruby? Thank you, and thank you for your patience on waiting to get your chance at the podium.
Mine might be 3 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll challenge John here real quick.
All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance, including those online?
Good evening. John Pericini, 633 Windy Cove Court. Just want to make sure you can hear me all right.
Yes, we can.
Since it's been such a short evening, I'll try to keep mine within an hour of my presentation, if that's okay. No, I wanted to give you a quick background. I'm sorry it's taken this long. I know you guys had a long night here. I wanted to thank Ken Prince, Derek. We've been working on this for a long time. Initially was to get the site, tried to get the site developed and lined up with the target site across the street. Beacon, as you know, owns the property. It's been vacant a long time itself. Mr. Tarani has come and we took it under contract. We've been on this about 6 months, and it got to a point we're still working on the possible access across the street, but with the business there and some landowners, it's just taken a while. So we decided to continue to work on it. I promised Ken I would do that and move forward with this site, because we have buyers and sellers and we have timetables. So we got it narrowed down to the right in and right out on University and the right in, right out, and the left in on Main Street or Gumwood. The site is set for the car wash. It's pretty strict requirements between a lot of negotiations with Ken and Haji and how they wanted it to look. The rest of the site is kind of conceptual right now. We got a couple drive-throughs. We're just kind of open right at this point. Not sure, if we're going to have high-density housing, some potential a hotel. We just don't know. So the focus right now was to try to lock up some of those drive-throughs for the outlots and then for the car wash. And on behalf of Beacon, they would would appreciate to get this passed also. I think Haji is, I'm not sure, I don't think he's speaking, but he is online. If you have some questions there, would appreciate your support. It's been kind of a long haul there, but there's been a lot of working together to get to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Piericini?
I do. Maybe.
Mrs.
Hi,
Volker.
Mr. Pericini. Hi, thank you. So, John, I
Hi.
just have a quick question. I'm a little confused. This is a drive-in shine, and isn't there a drive-in shine right down the street?
Yes.
So
Yes.
is this replacing the drive-in shine that's right down the street?
No,
Or
it
is
is
this an
not.
additional drive-in shine?
It's an additional drive and shine, right?
But it's not-
I think what, probably, I don't want to speak out of school, but I think what Mr. Tarani is doing is the business is growing, there's competition, it's gotten to be, a very competitive business, and he's trying to secure his market, is what he's doing. And from his studies with these national associations and these larger ones, this seems to be a good strategy. And with his monthly program, actually the customers are liking this because, now they go on Bittersweet, they can go north, they can go south. It's making it much more convenient for them. And there's a little bit of a break line there on Cleveland, that area, the north of the toll road and the south. Seems to be a lot of break in the different type of customers too. But he realizes that we had this conversation. He's done a lot of research on it. And so that's a long answer, but yes, it's going to be another one.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I was reading it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Piericini? Mr. Mamalante?
Not necessarily a question, John. I was just going to ask you to scoot over so I can watch a little bit of that game behind you.
At least I have the volume down because I know it's a lot of times people have it on and it starts echoing through the whole chamber.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Piericini?
No.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance?
I know you've been in the meeting for about 3.5 hours, so I don't want to take too much of your time. Haji Tarani, I live at 51390 Norwich Drive, Granger, Indiana. I'm the developer, and the question that you asked, Ms. Volker, very appropriate. It's like, why so close? And they are really two separate marketing areas, believe it or not, as close as they are. And in our business, I don't know how much you know, but I used to serve the International Car Wash Association board, the only body that basically governs and helps the car wash industry, and I was its chairman for a year. And so over the course of all these conversations and meetings and visits that I've had to other facilities, what the consumers really want is convenience. And, even a mile drive is too much. This will be our 5th facility in the city of Mishawaka, if we get approved to build it. And it will be a little bit of a different mix. This one will actually have an indoor self-vacuum building similar to the one on State Road 23 that we have with the big glass building that the other location that we have does not offer. And so that would be the big differentiation between the two. Plus the fact that, again, being in a different marketing area. We think it's a great location. It's been sitting there for a long time, as you know, undeveloped. And as you've seen the other facilities that we build, we do a great job landscaping. I mean, we don't cut corners. We do utilize local labor for construction of any of our locations. And we're part of that. And we also love to fly the U.S. flag at every location, and Ken has given us the green light for that. So we're very appreciative of that as well.
Very good.
Thank you. Any additional questions from the council, Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes, just had a quick question, and I know you had mentioned that it serves two different markets from your perspective, but do you anticipate the other location just south, just easing up a little bit and maybe easing some of that traffic flow and congestion?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Actually, that's really one of our desires, is that we believe that that location is a little too busy, honestly, and a little overserved. And so this should take some load off of that location. We've already noticed a little bit of reduction in load since we built the one on 23. And we believe this will do a little bit more. And yes.
Okay, thank you. And feel free to slow that conveyor belt down a little bit more when we drive through.
We're going to switch that to a belt here in shortly. You've seen that other locations that we're building all have belts, and this is going to go from a conveyor to a belt as well.
Okay.
The one that we have already on Main Street.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Then is there anyone physically present who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed ordinance? Is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Hearing no one, are there any council members who wish to speak? If not, then I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-38, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, is from time to time amended, commonly known as the zoning ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is a PUD amendment for a restaurant with drive-through, reduced parking, and fiber cement board, 5540 North Main Street.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President. To the members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Land Use Planning, to whom is referred the matter of proposed ordinance 2022-38, report that they have examined said matter and, at their opinion, should be adopted. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for its acceptance.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This is the second reading of public hearing on proposed ordinance 2022-38. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward. And do I feel like I ever really owe you an apology as well?
Believe it or not, it's been my privilege. With elections coming up, and I'll get on my soapbox a little bit, but this is the beautiful part of my job, truly. I'm an urban planner by trade, so seeing this democracy in action is really something to behold. So I'll step down. My name is Mark Hunter. I'm with Net Lease Properties, representing obviously the developer for this project. I will keep this short. Obviously, we've been working very closely with Derek and his staff, and we agree with the findings of the staff report. And I do want to make myself available for any questions, but I will leave it at that for my presentation.
Thank you for your brevity. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward. Seeing no one, is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition? And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? Hearing none, then I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksabah?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0.
Privilege of the floor. At this time, members of the public are invited to the podium to speak with respect to non-agenda items only under privilege of the floor.
Go all the way.
He went home hours ago.
We lost him.
And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak under privilege of the floor? Oh, Your Honor.
Have it taken.
Come forward. Although the prior speaker set the bar pretty high for you, so.
Well, I'll try to keep this short, but I do want to take this opportunity, Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood Mayor here, to congratulate one of our very own here, that is Ken Prince, who just won the Ivan H. Breiniger Municipal Management Award, which recognizes a public servant for their outstanding contributions to their community. They select one every year in the state of Indiana, and Ken was that person. Thanks to the recommendation that we submit his nomination from Clerk Block and by many of his peers and myself who wrote letters and told of the contributions that Ken has done for the city of Mishawaka, many of which we certainly could not quantify because they are vast. But I will likely pay for it in purgatory, as I had to bend any kind of rule out there, tell several maybe fibs. Ken's not a guy who likes recommendations, so to get him down to French Lick to accept this award, it took a lot. But we got him there. He was unsuspecting and received the award. And I know he was grateful for it, but not near as grateful as we all are for the job he does. And as you've seen tonight and many, many other nights and that he does for our city. So thank you, Ken.
It's truly an honor to serve, and we're done. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Prince, well deserved. Is there anyone else wishing to speak under privilege of the floor? Hearing no one, we'll move into unfinished business, of which there is none. New business. Is there any new business to come before the council? I have been asked by a representative of the West End Neighborhood Watch to announce that they are meeting on Tuesday, November 8th at 7 p.m., once again at St. Bavo's, and that their guest speakers will be Joe Van Neville from Code Enforcement and Vic Casnia. So we certainly invite everybody to attend that meeting. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak under new business? And hearing none, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.